Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. A month has passed since she's been pulled from the arena. A month has passed since she shot an arrow that blew open the third quarter quell. A month has passed since she kissed Peeta goodbye and said see you soon. A month has passed since she was abducted. A month has passed since she was rescued by rebel forces. A month has passed since Katniss has been brought in to the rebellion. Katniss has been rehabilitated by the people of District 13, who are known for their development of nuclear weapons, and they were the former military district of the capital prior to the Dark Days. The people are very strict, very formal, and very conservative. The rebellion and the people of District 13 are relatively astonished that Katniss doesn't embrace the Mockingjay role with open arms, and in fact nearly rejects it. Katniss doesn't deduce herself down to the girl on fire, the Mockingjay, or the girl that held out those berries. District 13 justifies the cost of flying her to District 12 in hopes that seeing the ruins of her district will sway her toward their cause and convince her that they are in fact the good guys. Because remember, Katniss only found out that she was expected to be the Mockingjay, or that she might be a symbol of the rebellion in any way, shape, or form, when Bonnie and Twill held out a cracker with her pin on it. And, of course, Haymitch spent the entirety of Catching Fire downplaying her importance as it relates to the uprisings and the whole revolution situation. So she's surprised and betrayed and incredibly traumatized. She's very ill. She's hurt. She's extremely disoriented, and thus uses her medical leeway to wander around the underground compound that is District 13 and sleep in supply closets. Mockingjay starts with Katniss standing amidst the wreckage of the now demolished District 12. She's crouched on the ground in the burned ruins of her former home, beside the bed that she used to share with her little sister. She's walked through the smoking wreckage of her town, and she believes she's responsible for all the damage that she sees there. 90% of District 12 was unable to escape the flames that engulfed the entirety of the district. Gale is actually responsible for the 10% of the population that managed to make it out. Immediately after Katniss shot the arrow that blew the arena, the Capital Network went dark. All the power shut off in District 12. Gale immediately rallied anyone he could, which were mostly folks in the seam because that's where he lives, through the meadow, out the fence, and to the lake. Hoverplanes had arrived to bomb the place. So the people of District 12, those that did escape, only had 15 minutes to flee. Prim and Katniss's mother set up a medical center out by the lake in the woods and attempted to treat as many people as they could with the meager supplies that they had. Gale had 800 terrified people to feed, and with 2 sets of bows and a fishing net, he managed to do so for 3 days. Don't know if that is a Jesus reference? All the surviving people of District 12 are now officially refugees in District 13. They mostly exist entirely underground, are issued identical clothing, and are expected to assimilate. Katniss unintentionally associates District 13 with the destruction of her district. Everyone's pretty surprised by District 13's warm welcome, but Katniss attributes their open arms to a pox epidemic that had actually taken out a pretty significant portion of District 13's population a few years back. So District 13, in a very waste not, want not mentality, recognizes District 12 as new breeding stock. But Katniss says they are being trained as soldiers and educated. Prim tells Katniss that school and the education she's able to attain are a lot more interesting here because it's not being censored, obviously. She says she hates almost everyone now, but mostly she hates herself. She's thinking about all of this as she walks through the ruins of her town. She passes the Justice Building, just a blackened heap of rubble, metaphor. No one has heard from Peeta's parents or siblings, and fewer than a dozen of the town's well-to-do made it out before the firebombs arrived. So it's presumed that Peeta's entire family is dead. Katniss is plagued by images of Peeta being tortured for rebel information that he does not have, and has been plagued by these images for the last month. A month is a really long time. Katniss passes the mayor's house and notes that no one's heard from Mage's family either. So she's hopeful that maybe with him being the mayor, he would have been evacuated out, but it's quite unlikely. And later we find out that that's not what happened. When Katniss is in District 13, she's regularly subjected to these Mockingjay meetings, wherein Plutarch and his assistant Fulvia try to convince her to consent to being the Mockingjay. Can you convince someone to consent to something? They try to convince her to perform being the Mockingjay more willingly. They're trying to get her to cooperate. Katniss is really worried because she knows the Mockingjay issue is one that needs to be solved at some point in time. She knows their patience will run out. Katniss introduces us to Alma Coin, president of District 13 and leader of the rebellion, and she's very much the embodiment of all the values that her district holds. She's very serious, she's non-reactive, she's not emotional, she's quite calculating, she's a strategic person. Katniss describes her as a person that's ultimately leached of color. Katniss is pretty insubordinate. Each person from District 13 gets a schedule stamped on their arm every single morning, and they are supposed to follow that schedule. Report to training, report to nuclear history class. Katniss wholly ignores her schedule, choosing instead to wander aimlessly or to sleep in supply closets. Sometimes she hears such information that is so traumatizing and so painful, she thinks if I don't get above ground right now, I will start screaming. And so she often walks away from the table without being dismissed. She overhears Coin tell someone, I told you we should have rescued the boy first. And Katniss says she couldn't agree more. She always knew that. In fact, that's the conclusion she arrived at the end of Catching Fire. Some of the other victors are trying to keep Peeta alive because they all recognize that his voice could collectively do more for a rebellion than any one of them could. It was them that misunderstood that Katniss isn't the Mockingjay without Peeta. She says, who did they fish out of the arena instead? Me, who won't cooperate. BT, father of Ampert, has made a partial recovery, and I guess he's so important to the revolution that he was wheeled from the hospital to some top secret area where he has spent all of his time working on the rebellion, working on forces for good. Finnick is asleep most of the time, and when he is conscious, he appears really disoriented. She says he can't grasp what's going on here in 13 because he's working so hard to see what's going on in the capital with the love of his life, Annie, who has been picked up by the capital and is being tortured, not for any particular rebel information. She's quite unwell and pretty cognitively unstable, so Finnick knows they're just torturing her to hurt him, which makes it feel like his fault. So Katniss says she's forgiven Finnick for his part in the conspiracy because it's hard to stay mad at someone who cries so much. Katniss agonizes over this decision to become the Mockingjay or to embrace the role. She recognizes herself as responsible for all of the death that we have been witness to since the beginning of the series. So that means each uprising and every resulting death in every single district, the increased policing of her district and all the victims of the whipping post, Gale being whipped, all the victors of the 75th Hunger Games being put into the games, all the folks that died throughout, particularly Cedar and Chaff, Darius, Cinna, 90% of her district, and now, of course, the pain that Peeta is enduring. She considers it all her fault. We've talked about Snow being someone who externalizes his feelings. When he has a feeling, he believes that someone around him is at fault for it. None of his feelings are his responsibility. Katniss, her trauma has led her to be the opposite way. She internalizes everyone's feelings. That's why it's so important for her to mitigate the suffering of the people she loves. She believes that other people's feelings are legitimately her responsibility. She takes everything personally. So how can she take action when she knows that someone she loves or someone she doesn't even know will get hurt if she opens her mouth? It's a pretty big responsibility, and the fact that she's not recklessly embracing the role says a lot about this character. She's thoughtful. She can't really talk this through with anyone because she doesn't trust anyone anymore. She is sharing a compartment with her mother and Prim, and that's nice, but their relationship has drastically changed. She hasn't been able to confide in her mother since she was 11 years old, and she still thinks of Prim as someone she needs to protect. Her and Gale, their relationship has mended somewhat over the last month without the pressure of her arranged marriage to Peeta. But we'll talk about that more in a second. Katniss, still in District 12, walks to the Victor's Village, which was untouched by firebombs. She wonders if this was meant to be a message to her, probably, or if it's because sometimes Capitol officials have to go to District 12 on business and they need somewhere decent to stay. Could be that too. She finds Buttercup, Prim's cat, and puts him in her father's game bag, and she also is able to pick up her father's hunting jacket, her parents' wedding book, some medical supplies, a ribbon for Prim. She's allowed to collect effects from home in a way that nobody else in District 12 or any of the other victors have been able to. While she's collecting these things, she finds in her bedroom an artificially perfected and extremely perfumed rose sitting in a glass of water. She knows that this is a message from the president. The smell alone makes her gag. She becomes quite terrified because she wonders if this means that he's about to bomb her right now. The rose is so fresh, she doesn't know when it was put there. She believes what that rose is meant to say. I can find you, I can reach you, perhaps I am watching you now. She flees the house and boards the hovercraft and doesn't tell anyone that there might be impending doom. She doesn't talk to anyone about the roses from President Snow and what they might mean. She's completely alone in this. As the hovercraft starts to zoom back to District 13, she relaxes a little bit. We learn that geographically, District 13 is only a week's walk away from District 12, so Bonnie and Twill were not so far from their destination, but Katniss believes they didn't make it. No one in District 13 has heard of them. Katniss also learns about District 13's betrayal. Because of their weapons arsenal, they were able to train their nuclear missiles on the capital and broker a deal for their district's sovereignty, ultimately selling out the other districts that they led into rebellion and leaving them to be subjected to even worse conditions than they had to endure before. Obviously, District 13 didn't get out of this completely unharmed, though, because the capital did bomb their above-ground city and the entire city was forced to move underground. So, mostly, the people of 13, for the last 75 years, have lived underground. They practice strenuous discipline discipline, and pretty constant vigilance. Waste is regarded as a criminal activity. Katniss comes back from 12. She drops off Buttercup to her compartment with her mother and Prim. They're both very excited to see him. Katniss is shortly thereafter ordered to command. When she's in command, who does she see on TV but Caesar Flickerman? He's doing an interview with Peeta Malark. This is the first time Katniss has laid eyes on Peeta, heard anything about him since he was abducted, taken hostage, and was likely tortured for information. Katniss immediately evaluates Peeta and he looks okay. He looks basically the same as he did the day he left the arena. So she believes that maybe he's not being tortured. She doesn't see a reflection of agony in his eyes. So Caesar asks Peeta a series of questions about their last nights in the arena. Caesar insinuates how unlikely it is that Katniss didn't know about the rebel plot, given that she's the one that blew the force field on the arena wide open. Peeta defends Katniss, insisting she was innocent and that she had no idea what they were doing. He cites different examples that prove that Katniss clearly was not in on the rebel plan, and then he reveals that those last moments were extreme chaos. He says Brutus killed Chaff.
She hears Peeta calling her from somewhere far away in the jungle, and she thinks, okay, well, all I can do is distract whoever is attacking him. So she starts shouting out, I'm here, to try to entice his attacker to come attack her.
And he says that he himself had to kill Brutus. And I think that that's a really interesting way for Collins to end the Hunger Games. For Peeta to inflict the last kill in the Hunger Games ever and have it be Peeta's first kill in the Hunger Games. And who was he forced to kill in self-defense but the only volunteer in this game of games? It's pretty powerful. And it's something that happens so quickly that we don't really absorb the impact of that until we get Peeta articulating it for us here. So Peeta killed Brutus, despite him not wanting to be a piece in these games, despite him believing that he wants to hold onto his soul. At the very end, he did have to give it up to survive. Then, Peeta calls for a ceasefire, insisting that the only way forward is for the people to lay down their weapons before humanity bombs itself into extinction. He believes that Panem is at risk of eradicating the human species.
It is insisted upon by those in power that it's the responsibility of those without power to endure their exploitation, their children's starvation, and their imprisonment for the good of mankind.
Katniss recognizes that a ceasefire could only end in the district's re-imprisonment, and probably, if the Hunger Games were the punishment for the last rebellion, the capital would have a lot of orchestrated suffering in store for them. So she knows that a ceasefire would just lead to worse conditions and is not an answer. And, of course, calling for a ceasefire is treating the way that they are choosing to protect themselves as if it is the offense itself, but it's not. If the capital laid down its weapons, there would be a ceasefire. The capital's not fighting for anything other than the right to enslave its people. So Katniss has a lot to process right now. She's seen Peeta for the first time. He's not only alive, but he seems unharmed, and now he's calling for a ceasefire, and everyone that's in charge of her is calling him a traitor. So Katniss can't process these things with an audience, and she attempts to flee command, as she's done many times before. And then the president says, "You have not been dismissed, Soldier Everdeen." Katniss moves to walk away anyway, and someone puts a hand on her arm, and she says that while it's not threatening, she has done 2 trips to the arena, so she tends to react defensively to unfamiliar touch. So she throws that person off of her and runs toward her supply closet. She's processing that Peeta is alive, rocking back and forth. She says her smile is so big it hurts her cheeks. Her lips are almost splitting. "You're alive." Gale finds her in the supply closet, and he has a bloody nose, and he got it because he got in the way of the guy that tried to stop Katniss, and turns out that was Boggs. I'll tell you more about him later. So Katniss says her and Gale are friends again because of Peeta been taken out of the equation, and now Gale doesn't push things any further than the friendship that they have. He doesn't try to kiss her or talk about love, which are just the basic tenets of friendship, I think. Like, okay. Katniss, while she's sitting in that supply closet, gives District 13 something that she hasn't until that moment: credit for finding a way to stay alive, for managing on their own with no aid, no help, no support. She says, sure, in some ways they're more controlling than the capital.
Ultimately, it's a saga about social inequality, corrupt government, and violence against children, about the ethics of control, about authority as a contrast to freedom.
They're very overprogrammed and they lack a sense of humor. They have very strict rules about food, but they're here, and maybe that's what it took to be here. She's processing with Gale, and she's like, it took them long enough to show up. And Gale says, well, they needed someone to set it in motion. They needed you. And Katniss says, well, they also needed Peeta too, because I don't hold out the berries without Peeta to hold them out for. So they seem to have forgotten that. She's pissed that they turned on Peeta so quickly. Gale says if he could press a button and kill everyone in the capital, he would. He watched his city burn to the ground, and he couldn't save everyone. Friends, family. So Katniss decides that she will be the Mockingjay. Now that she knows Peeta's alive, she can make a move. Though she's decided to be the Mockingjay, she's having a hard time sleeping. Finds herself pacing in her room, unable to find comfort anywhere, longing for Peeta's arms and his embrace. She's really worried because if she agrees to be the Mockingjay and the rebel movement is successful, what will happen to Peeta when he is apprehended as someone that's ultimately been fighting with the capital? She is worried that Peeta will be subjected to District 13's justice justice system, and that doesn't feel fair given that whatever he's saying, he's clearly been coerced to say. So she feels compelled to protect Peeta, but can't reckon that with the task of being the Mockingjay. So Prim and Katniss have a whispered conversation in the night wherein Prim enlightens Katniss to her importance. She says, Katniss, I don't think you understand what a big deal you are. There's not anything you could ask for that they wouldn't find a way to get you. So Prim says, make your demands and they'll be met. But then Prim also says, you should probably get a guarantee though, because how can you prove they won't renege on the deal once the fighting has stopped? So the next day when Katniss shows up in command, alert, attentive, and asking for a pen and paper, everyone's super surprised. She takes a moment to collect her thoughts and she writes out her list of demands. And they are as follows. Buttercup, my sister gets to keep her cat. This creates such an uproar in command that she's like, oh shit, this is my easiest ask. So if this is getting this response, I'm not sure how the other things are going to go. But eventually it's decided that Katniss, Prim, and her mother will move to a higher compartment so that Buttercup can go in and out of the outdoors. If he's not back by sundown, he'll be locked out. He's responsible for feeding himself. There's a list of rules. But Buttercup is good to stay. The other demands are hunting. She wants to be able to hunt with Gale at least once a day. She says, I'll perform better if I'm able to be above ground and think. When she says she wants to be able to spend time with Gale, Point says, okay, well, do you want Gale presented as your lover? Like, there's a few instances of slut-shaming that take place in this book, and they're really frustrating because all of slut-shaming is frustrating, but it's particularly frustrating because Katniss has never initiated any sort of romantic contact with Gale. The only thing she finds herself compelled to do is respond to it so that she can save him from suffering or pain of his unrequited love. But like, Katniss really isn't torn between these two men. One of these men is trying to tear her away from the other, and that's a different thing. So Katniss is really appalled and taken aback by Coin saying, do you want us to present Gale as your lover? Because A, she's like, I am not thinking about who is being presented as my lover. What? B, the fact that Coin thinks that she would just discard Peeta in this way. And C, that people think Gale's her lover. And Plutarch comes in and he's like, it would actually look kind of bad if Katniss just cast off Peeta, especially because the world thinks she's pregnant with his child. On camera, he'll be with you, just presented as your cousin. They say off camera, he is all yours. Katniss also asks for not only Peeta's immunity, but immunity of all former victors of the Hunger Games. Coin dismisses this out of hand initially. She's like, I can't give him immunity for something that he hasn't done yet, right? She's attempting to actually not engage with a corrupt justice system by saying some people get pardons simply because of who they are. She's trying to be fair. She's saying he will be tried in the context of what happens. We will take into account that he will have been coerced into saying what he has to say, but we don't know what damage he'll do to the rebel movement. I can't give him an abject pardon. Plutarch sways her. He's like, he's only a boy. He's not even of age. And Katniss says, yeah, so here's the deal. I'll be your Mockingjay, but these are my conditions. So you will give him immunity, and you'll give all the victors of any former Hunger Games immunity, and you'll announce it to the entirety of the district to hold yourself accountable, or you'll find yourself another Mockingjay. Coin says, fine, but you better perform. Katniss's last condition is that she kills Snow. And Coin says, when the time comes, I'll flip you for it. We get this funny conversation between Plutarch and his main assistant, Fulvia. And he says he really misses coffee. And his assistant's like, yeah, we really thought that, like, at least in the higher ranks, there'd be some leniency, right? Even District 12 had a black market, right? Katniss is given Cinna's sketchbook, wherein he has designed several outfits for her to go to war in. And Plutarch says that Cinna made him swear that he wouldn't give it to her until she decided to be the Mockingjay on her own. He was like, I almost did it a few times, but I respected his last wishes. And everyone's like, claps for you, Plutarch. Her role as the Mockingjay now will be to film a series of propos that they launch through airtime assault on the Capitol networks. The people of the Capitol have been subject exclusively to Capitol propaganda, social programming, and brainwashing. So putting anything rebellious on TV is literally revolutionary. Not to mention that most of Katniss's rebellious acts, like a lot of this war, has been waged on television. Right? Like, the Capitol took it to that space. So Plutarch and his Capitol crew had the forethought to bring lots of makeup supplies and tools to District 13 to help remake Katniss into this gorgeous Mockingjay creature. Plutarch's assistant says, and then we'll work your personality up to the look. Plutarch says he has a surprise for Katniss and takes her into, what is ultimately a very far underground prison, where they find her prep team chained to a wall. Apparently one of them stole some bread. This prep team is in District 13 because they were taken hostage by some rebels without their consent and brought here on Cinna's orders for Katniss. Katniss takes her prep team immediately to her mother, and she sees a look of consternation cross her mother's face, not because she hasn't seen people badly wounded before, but because perhaps these things happen here too. There's a lot of conversations about the way that Katniss looks. While her prep team and the visionaries from the Capitol remake her, they're disgusted by her real wounds and have a lot of discussion about how to cover them up, and then they give her fake wounds, fake grime and fake grit, so she can be more palatable to the viewer. I think it's just another reflection, like the coffee comments, of how removed Plutarch and his crew are from the fighting. Like, Plutarch is often referred to in this book as the head game maker of the revolution. So Plutarch has the abused and traumatized prep team released on his orders. Katniss says to Plutarch and Gale and Plutarch's crew, well, obviously that was Coin sending us a message about who's in control here and what happens if you don't obey. So if you had any illusions about power, I'd check them at the damn door. Katniss is 17 years old and Plutarch is an adult man that has just orchestrated a revolution. And he's like, maybe you're underestimating how important we are to the rebellion. Unconcerned. And Katniss says, sure, Plutarch, just like the tributes are necessary for the games, right? Till they're not. Katniss and Gale head out for their first hunting session, and Katniss says her shoes don't fit right, because everyone in District 13 wears hand-me-downs. She says between her and the last person, one of them walks funny because the shoes are broken in all wrong. I wonder if this is Collins' symbolism, that Katniss is in a role in District 13 that was not designed for her and was actually broken in by somebody else. And I'm wondering if those people are, one, Haymitch, right? We know that Haymitch broke in this role because him and Plutarch have a conversation about it in District 11 on his victory tour 25 years before any of this takes place, wherein,
And Haymitch says, you need someone who's not like me. Plutarch says, no, we need someone exactly like you, just luckier.
I'm wondering if the role was designed by Haymitch for Katniss and thus it doesn't fit. Or perhaps the role legitimately, the role of mouthpiece, belongs to Peeta. It doesn't fit Katniss. She can't walk the way she's supposed to in these shoes. Once Gale and Katniss have hunted, they sit by the river, and Gale is cleaning the game, and Katniss has her face toward the sun. And Gale says, Katniss, why do you care so much about your prep team? And she says, why shouldn't I? And he says, because they've spent the last 2 years prettying you up for your slaughter? And Katniss says, well, they're not bad people, they're not evil, they're weak and stupid and dumb, and she actually thinks of them as affectionate pets. She says, it's like hurting children. And Gale says, okay, what about the actual children that were forced to fight to their death? Was it a big secret in the Capitol that was going on? Why are you defending these people? He says, I just don't think Coin was sending you some big message. She probably thought she was doing you a favor. Katniss seems to understand that vengeance is not for the victims. Vengeance is for the people around them that feel they should have done something to protect the people that got hurt. Coin calls a mandatory meeting, as is on par with Katniss's condition, and she tells the people of the district that Katniss has agreed to be the Mockingjay under a few conditions, and the people of the district seem to bristle a little bit, but Katniss is way beyond giving a shit about that. She's like, whatever. Coin adds that, of course, yes, the victors will be given full immunity, regardless of the outcome of the war. However, if Katniss should fail or disobey, the deal will be revoked. So, Peeta won't be protected if Katniss is insubordinate, which she has a tendency to be. Katniss says, Coin, with her fistful of precious nukes and her well-oiled machine of a district, finds that it's even harder to groom a Mockingjay than it is to catch one. She says, in one way, Coin's different than all the other authoritarian leaders she's been dealing with because Coin is the first one to publicly brand her as a threat. Gale says, Katniss, she's running a district. She can't just look like she's bending to your will. And Katniss says, you mean she can't stand dissent, even if it's fair. And I think they both have a point here, actually. Katniss is pretty upset because Gale seems to take Coin's side. On the Gale, Coin, Katniss, Plutarch spectrum, Gale tends to take the side of Team Mockingjay and the rebellion quite often, which makes sense because Katniss at one point in time literally conflated being with Gale with being a rebel leader. So she knows that, but she's disoriented. She's been through a lot. But Gale, after this conversation, says, what? Why are you so mad at me for telling you my opinion? Do you want me to lie? And Katniss says, no, I want you to rethink it and come up with the correct opinion. Gale and Katniss are ordered to special defense to see what BT has prepared for them. BT won his games by electrocuting all of the other tributes in the arena, and he had to stand there and watch them die. And Katniss thinks self-defense. This was all in self-defense. We were just doing this in self-defense. But she has to remind herself. Maybe that's for a reason. BT and his team and the other folks of District 3 are responsible for a lot of the progress that the entirety of Panem has seen. So to know that he's dedicating his work and his enormous brain, his thoughts, to something like, how can we kill people? It's just scary. They enter the only place that Katniss can describe as beautiful in District 13. It's a replication of a meadow with real live trees, lots of live plants, and hummingbirds. And BT asks Katniss if it's possible to catch a hummingbird, and she says there's really no need to try. because there's not a lot of meat on them. And he says, no, you're not one to kill for sport. And Gale pipes in and says, I bet we could snare him. And then we get the preliminary rendition of the snare that will ultimately end this book. It's going to escalate. He says you could bait the inside and then snap the mouth shut. Prey on the fear that the bird will fly away and have a net waiting in that direction. Katniss is super freaked out by this conversation because she knows they're not really talking about hummingbirds, and even if they were talking about hummingbirds, it doesn't feel good to her. Because she's freaked out, she believes it's her responsibility to distract these men before someone sets up a snare. BT has designed personalized weapons for Katniss and Finnick, and he's letting Gale make a selection of his choice. Before they can enter the arsenal, there are a lot of security measures that they have to get through, and Katniss wonders if that's about the influx of immigrants or if District 13 simply does not trust its own citizens. The arsenal takes Katniss's breath away. Gale chooses an extremely lethal-looking crossbow with lots of gadgets and gizmos on it. Katniss says doesn't seem very fair to the deer because even though she's been to the arena, even though she's in the middle of a war, when she thinks about killing, it's about killing animals. For food. Gale says, wouldn't be using it on deer, would I? He says if I had a weapon that would have kept you from the arena, I would have used it. Katniss doesn't know how to tell him about the aftermath of killing a person, how they never truly leave you. BT comes back for a bow with Katniss. He says, for you, for you. It's really elegant and sleek, and it's designed to look like a bird in flight. He gives her 3 types of bows: razor sharp, incendiary, and explosive. It also has options of voice override. It's very fancy. She, of course, has no intention to use this weapon, as demonstrated by the conversation before, because she's not authorized for combat, because she is a traumatized 17-year-old girl who spent the last month wandering aimlessly, dazed and confused, around a completely new city, running from authorities, and sleeping in supply closets. BT asks Katniss about Finnick so he can give him the trident, and Katniss kind of hedges, and BT says if you knew what he'd been through, you'd be surprised that he's standing here at all today. So Katniss has her prop/real weapon. She's been remade by her prep team. She's dressed in Cinna's clothing, and she's standing on a soundstage. Things don't go so amazingly though, because they feed her a line, and we all know that Katniss sucks at performing. To be fair to Katniss, the line is also a mouthful. This is the line. People of Panem, we fight, we dare, we end our hunger for justice. Like, come on. These people have been bombed, starved, tortured, enslaved, imprisoned, exploited. We fight, we dare? I mean... Anyway, she says the line, no one says anything, and re-enter Haymitch. And oh, he's saying something mean. He says, and that, my friends, is how a revolution dies. Katniss is immediately enraged to learn that Haymitch has any control or authority over her life again, but regardless of her fury, she knows that he's right about her performance. So, not only is Katniss not political, she has no aspirations to be a political figure. She was only converted to the idea of the rebellion weeks before she was reaped to go into the clock arena. Every time she opens her mouth and is semi-effective, not as the Mockingjay, but as herself, someone or multiple someone's dies, and she feels it on her conscience. 3, she doesn't think she can do it because everyone around her has reinforced her own internalized belief that she is sort of worthless without Peeta. Peeta is the other half of the star-crossed lovers, the talented half. Alone, Katniss can't be the Mockingjay. The last time Haymitch and Katniss saw one another was 1 month ago on the hovercraft, immediately after she'd been lifted out of the arena. And at that moment, when she was enlightened to Haymitch's betrayal. So the last time these two were face to face, Katniss was raking her fingernails down his face and he was screaming insults at her while Finnick tries to drag her from the room. Back in the control room, Katniss examines Haymitch and says that he looks pretty bad. They don't allow any sort of alcohol in District 13, so he's been forced to quit his substance abuse after 25 years of pretty significant usage. Now he's slightly yellow and looks like he's lost a lot of weight. Katniss feels concerned that he might be dying, but she has to remind herself that she doesn't care. Haymitch starts a demonstration. He gathers a couple people, some people from District 12, some people from District 10, some randos, right, in a room, and he says, can we all agree that this is of no use or help to the rebellion? And it's the Propos that they filmed. And everyone's like, cool, yeah, no. I want everyone in this room to name a time when Katniss genuinely moved you. Not when Peeta made you like her, and not when Cinna dressed her beautifully, but when Katniss did something that evoked emotion in you. When she volunteered to take Prim's place, because I'm sure she thought she was going to die. When she sang the song while the little girl died. When Katniss drugged Peeta to go get him medicine and kissed him goodbye. This leads the people of the rebellion to understand that Katniss can only work unscripted. All of the moments, and there are many, come from Katniss's soul. They come from her alone. So BT pats Katniss on the shoulder and says, so we should all just leave you alone then, right? So it becomes clear that what Haymitch is actually suggesting is that they send Katniss into combat zones. Plutarch says, we'll spread the word that she lost the baby. Very sad. Very unfortunate. And Coin says, okay, so we send you, the traumatized 17-year-old, into a combat zone, and what happens if you're killed? Katniss says, make sure you get it on camera. Dalton from District 10 suggests that they wash Katniss's face because they made her look 35 and she's just a girl. Finally, Haymitch and Katniss are alone together for the first time. She says, I can't believe you didn't rescue Peeta. And he says, I know. And Katniss says that this feels incomplete, and not just because Haymitch didn't apologize, but because they were part of a team. This accusation of accountability is incomplete until Haymitch says, I can't believe you let him out of your sight. And I think this is meant to illuminate for us that Haymitch had no choice in the same way Katniss had no choice. It is clear to both Peeta and Katniss when they were counting that evening that they had to split up at that moment. Katniss needed to be taken away from Peeta in order to be incapacitated by Joanna to have her tracker cut out. That's the only way that the rebels were able to rescue her. Peeta and Joanna still had their trackers in. Katniss had no choice. For things to be the way they are now, they had to happen the way they did then. And so I think Haymitch saying this line, looking at her and saying, I can't believe you let him out of your sight, even though that's what you had to do, is the same thing as Katniss saying, I can't believe you didn't rescue Peeta, even though that's what you had to do. It was simply not possible to get him out because things have had to play out the way that they did. That was the only way. He's not dead yet. Katniss, we're still in the game. It has been decided that Katniss, Gale, and a camera crew will go to District 8, where Bonnie and Twill were from, to film amidst the wreckage and the wounded. District 8 is no longer fighting. The rebels have taken District 8. Should be a relatively safe mission. No one is authorized for combat. As Katniss is heading with Boggs to the hoverplane, Finnick finds them, and he runs toward in nothing but a hospital gown and slippers. And he says, Katniss, they won't let me go. I told them I'm fine. They won't even let me come in the plane. OMG, Finnick, I totally forgot. BT needs you for the special trident reveal. He says, right, of course, I better get down there. And Katniss says, Finnick, maybe some pants? And he whips off his hospital gown, leaving him in just his underwear. And he says, why? Do you find this distracting? I think Katniss is attracted to Finnick, and I think Suzanne Collins is attracted to Finnick. She says, I'm only human, O'Dare. Boggs commends Katniss on her gentle handling of Finnick, and Katniss is like, Boggs has spoken up twice today in a way that makes me think he'd rather be friends than enemies. Maybe I should like Boggs. Boggs and Katniss continue walking toward the hovercraft, where he has to walk her through their nuclear arsenal, and Katniss says, this is actually very impressive, and he says, well, we can't take the credit because we inherited most of it. And she's like, what the heck? Where you been then? And he was like, well, we had to be really careful because if we engage in nuclear warfare, we could wipe out the entire species. And Katniss says, well, that sounds a lot like what Peeta said, and you all called him a traitor. And Boggs is like, well, we're doing things the old-fashioned way. We had to build up a different kind of arsenal. They reach the hovercraft, and Fulvia is admiring Gale's face and disparaging Katniss's at the same time. She's like, sorry, Katniss, just not everyone's born camera ready, like this guy. And she says, isn't he handsome? Katniss doesn't think Gale is handsome. I don't think she does. Katniss is floored by this and finds it quite awkward given their history, and Boggs comes to the rescue. Well, don't expect us to be too impressed, because we just saw Finnick O'Dare in his underwear. Katniss says she decides to go ahead and like Boggs. So all the districts at this point are in full-scale rebellion, at war with the capital, except for District 2. District 2 is the military stronghold of the capital, and it took District 13's place immediately following the Dark Days. We probably have Strabo Plinth to thank for that. This is when Katniss finds out that most of the peacekeepers actually come from District 2. She thought that all the peacekeepers came from the capital, and Plutarch says, well, yeah, it's actually not that easy to get people from the capital to sign up for the peacekeepers, like, for the glory, because it's a 20-year commitment and you're not allowed to get married or have any sort of children, because it's really not easy to convince folks accustomed to capital life to swap that for dreary life in the districts. So most of the people from the capital that are peacekeepers are there because they had enormous debts, and it was a way to pay it back or as a punishment of some kind. Most of the peacekeepers are actually born and bred in District 2. The people of District 2, however, all the children in District 2 are raised with a warrior mindset, which is why they're so eager to volunteer for the Hunger Games. Katniss thinks of Cato, Clove, Brutus, and Abaria. Gale asks what will happen if the rebels win. Who will be in charge? And Plutarch says, everyone! He says, don't look so suspicious, it's worked before. In books. In history books. And remember, Plutarch has an enormous library in a nation where books are practically extinct. So he does have more information, right, as it relates to critical thinking and ideas, because that's what books do. And Katniss says, well, that's really nice for our ancestors and all, but they don't seem like much to brag about to her. Leaving them with the broken planet and all the wars and whatnot, they obviously didn't care about who came after them. They obviously don't care about us. Another piece of information is that all the soldiers are issued a little poison tablet, nicknamed Nightlock, for the berries that killed Foxface and ultimately ignited the revolution. resolution. And the reason that they have that is so they can take themselves out quickly if they are to be apprehended by the Capitol, to save themselves from the fate that Peeta has been enduring for at least a month now, and to protect the rebel movement from anyone that might be compelled to talk if they were being tortured. First, when they land in 8, Katniss, Gale, and their camera crew are all brought to a hospital tent. Katniss walks through that tent and serves as pretty intense inspiration for the injured and the dying. Among them are women and children. Many cry upon seeing Katniss, they inquire about Peeta and the baby, and they're reinvigorated just to know that she's alive. This is when she comes to terms with the fact that the Mockingjay is something beyond her. It's a skin that she sort of slides on. The Mockingjay means something more to the people around her than it could ever mean to her. Her being real and unscripted is why she belongs to the people. Gale questions Commander Paler of District 8 on the intelligence of keeping all the wounded together. And can we just imagine for a second that you are an adult woman that has just secured your district from the oppressive totalitarian government, and some 18-year-old kid swags up to you and is like, is it smart to keep all your wounded together? Katniss assumes that the reason he's asking is because the congregation of all the sick and dying will mean that any disease will spread like wildfire. But Commander Paler, the authority of District 8, says, I think it's slightly better than leaving them to die. Yeah. We learn, though, that Gale's concerns were not about quickened contagion. His concerns were about his enemy. We know that Gale's biggest asset is that he knows how to think like his prey, which, right now, is the Capitol. Because Capitol bombers are immediately incoming, and they target the hospital. Katniss and Gale defy orders. Gale actually gives Boggs a boot to the face and breaks his nose. So they defy orders from Boggs and Plutarch, and instead of seeking cover due to the incoming attack, seek higher ground so that they can participate and help. Katniss is surprised and impressed to see that her camera crew follows her. They've put themselves at risk in order to get the footage. So Katniss and Gale align with the forces of District 8 to take down a few planes, but not before the Capitol can bomb its target, the hospital. The Capitol bombs the hospital filled with injured soldiers, men, women, and children. There are no survivors. Katniss thinks, why would they target people who were dying? These people were not a threat to them. Gale says maybe to scare off others, prevent the wounded from seeking treatment, or maybe it's just because the Capitol only thinks in resource, and it doesn't need damaged slaves. Under this duress, with the flames of the hospital still burning behind her, Katniss delivers her first message to the president and to Panem since she was lifted from the arena. You can torture us, and bomb us, and burn our districts to the ground. But do you see that? Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us. Cut! That's a wrap. Cressida says that. Like, it's just crazy. Our entire generation was raised on YA dystopian fiction about taking down oppressive governments. It's a weird time to be alive, to watch this come to fruition. So Boggs gets a lock on Katniss's arm, and she's probably messed with her concussion. She sustained a lot of injuries during this bombing situation. The Mockingjay book is actually quite graphic, and she was injured before she went into District 8, so Boggs eventually lifts her up and cradles her toward his chest, and he starts running toward the hovercraft, and she throws up on him, and she says she can't tell, but she thinks she hears him sigh. We love a good man, you know? It's so easy to be a good man. Back in 13, Katniss learns that her mother and Prim were not notified of her departure until she was already gone, and Katniss thinks, shoot, I should pretend to let my mom parent me more. Katniss is really worried because obviously on this mission she directly disobeyed orders, which is just something she does, right? She's compelled to it. She can't help it. She has to do this. But she did perform. She did deliver. And because of that, Katniss remarks that the team she's working with now, they don't just do their work. They take pride in it. And she has a weird thought that if she were in the arena, she'd want them as allies. She calls the camera crew the insects. Their equipment makes it look like they are shelled creatures. When she tells them this, she says, I have to stop calling you the insects. They don't seem to mind the comparison, and I believe it's Collins' way of paralleling the fact that Katniss can't see people from the Capitol as human either, right? Like, she regards her prep team as affectionate pets. She regards the camera crew as insects. I think it's meant to demonstrate that the varied conditions that these two generations of humans have grown up in has resulted in varied evolution as well. Katniss observes Gale and Coin have an exchange that she describes as positively chummy. The extent of Gale's wounds, I'll update you on him, are they had to dig out some shrapnel, so no big deal. The editing crew has cut together the footage of the bombing, and it opens with Claudius Templesmith's voice saying, Katniss Everdeen, the girl on fire, burns on. And Katniss is like, oh, is Claudius Templesmith with us? And Plutarch's like, no, he said that during your actual games. Lucky for us, right? So Plutarch and the Mockingjay team and the rebellion in District 13 is still narrating the rebellion with Claudius Templesmith. She's still playing inside the Hunger Games this entire book. Katniss gleans that no one ratted her out. No one ratted out her and Gale for disobeying orders. And she's pretty surprised by that. But she figures that they got such good footage that everyone's just letting it slide. There's another ideation session of sorts, and during that session, session, Katniss notices that Plutarch has no need to take any sort of credit for each individual part. She has the wherewithal to recognize that that's because Plutarch doesn't measure his worth based on any one individual element of the rebellion. He will take his bow at the end. Plutarch really does seem to be regarding this revolution as if it's another game that he's orchestrating. And of course, he has stake in it, because all humans have stake in war, but for him it seems to be a sort of game. Katniss is back in the hospital, she's been sleeping, and when she wakes up, Haymitch is standing there, staring at her. What the? Why? Oh my god. And she suspects he's been sitting there for hours? Hello? Haymitch. When she wakes up, the first thing he does is threaten her. He says, this is your earpiece, which in District 8, she pulled out her earpiece, even though Haymitch said, don't you dare pull out your earpiece, like obviously. But this is Katniss. Anyway, he says, this is your earpiece. You'll wear it next time. Or, if you take it out, the time after that, you'll be wearing this head shackle that has a lock at the jaw. And I'll be the only one with the key. That way I'll be able to talk to you inside your brain 24 hours a day whenever I want. And like, I get it, right? Like, obviously Haymitch is trying to protect Katniss because she's getting herself into really dangerous situations, and it's pretty much luck that results in her survival. Katniss isn't that invested in her survival in a way that the people around her currently are. So I get that he's saying, hey, you need to keep your earpiece in. But the threat is just a lot. Anyway, she says, okay, anything else? And he says, yeah, while I was waiting, I ate your lunch. And she says, I'll report you. You do that, sweetheart. Katniss tells us that he knows she's not the reporting type. Finnick and Katniss are both still in the hospital wing. Finnick has never been discharged, but Katniss is back in the hospital wing because of the injury she sustained in District 8. And so they watch the Propos air together. It's very sad to watch because most of the Propos features people that are now dead. Finnick says people should know what happened, and now they do. But the Capitol has its own airtime ammunition to fire. And so before they can turn off the TV, they see another interview come up with Caesar Flickerman and Peeta Millark. Except this time, Peeta has lost nearly 15 pounds in the few days since the last interview aired. He's developed a nervous tremor in his hand, and he seems to be in pain whenever he moves. His eyes reveal a person who's been badly damaged. She realizes that the interview she saw a few days ago wasn't necessarily live, that maybe the reason Peeta looked like he just left the arena is because he had. She has no actual idea what's been going on with him or what's been happening to him in the month in between. Peeta only really says Capitol propaganda. He asks Katniss if she can trust the people around, which obviously she can't. But the real damage of the interview doesn't seem to be meant for the people of the districts, it seems to be meant for Katniss. She can hear Plutarch and the Mockingjay crew coming down the hall to talk to her about the Propos, and she has no idea how she's going to put a face on that communicates that she's alright. So Finnick says, let's just pretend we didn't see it. We didn't see it. That way you can process it, and also figure out who talks to you about it. See who you can trust. A day goes by, and no one tells Katniss. Not even Gale, which translates to Katniss that she really can't trust anyone here. No one tells her that immediately after the Mockingjay Propos aired, an extremely deteriorated Peeta showed up on television with Caesar Flickerman with a message for her. They didn't communicate that to her. That's a really big deal. Finnick and Katniss form a sort of team for a minute. He inquires a lot, like, no one's told you anything? And Katniss is like, no, maybe no one else saw it? It's pretty unbelievable that no one would share this information with her. And she's like, or is literally everyone keeping me in the dark? Finally, after a few days of waiting for someone to tell her, she cannot contain her rage at Gale, her main confidant. She can't believe he wouldn't say anything. And when it's revealed through just the rage behind her eyes, Gale says, oh, why didn't you say anything? And she's like, why didn't you? Everyone was afraid that seeing Peeta's Propos would make you sick. And she says, it did, but not as sick as you lying to me for coin. You'll never guess what Gale expresses next. First real hurt, then replaced by cold anger. What is he angry about? She thinks, so that's what everyone's doing. Lie to Katniss about the rebellion so she doesn't do anything crazy, send her into the arena with no idea so that we can fish her out, don't tell her about Peeta. It's hard enough to get a decent performance out of her as it is. That being said, Katniss's Propos is directly correlated to the rebels who were barely maintaining a foothold in several districts. They're rallying. They demonstrate a new strength. The rebels have taken 13 and 11. 11 is significantly important because it's the main food supplier of all of Panem, which puts Rue's starvation and the starvation of all the children of District 11 into perspective. Those children are responsible for harvesting all the food supply that the people of the capital are feasting on, and Rue and her family don't have enough for everyone to get a leg. Later, because that Propos was so successful and led to such movement on the rebel front, Katniss, her camera crew, and Gale are asked to go to District 12 to film more Propos. Big shock, Gale isn't speaking to Katniss. I know that's a really new strategy for him. Cressida ends up questioning Gale about his family, his job, his life in the seam, and eventually they ask him him to reenact or rewalk the pathway of the firebombing, so he takes them all the way from the meadow to the lake. Katniss says they're tripping over decomposing bodies the entire time. Katniss feels like the camera crew, being in her woods, being in her meadow, being in her lake, is actually an enormous invasion of privacy, because this space has always been her private sanctuary, and now it's not. She says she wishes she could dive into the lake, naked, unobserved, and alone. The last time she was at this lake, she was fighting with Gale about whether or not they should run away. She wonders if they had, would District 12 still be there? She thinks it would. She learns that Polox, one of her camera crewmen, is an Avox. The Capitol have mutilated his tongue. Well, actually, I don't know if it's that Katniss has more information, but earlier in the series, they say they do something to their tongues so that they no longer work anymore. But in this book right here, she says the Capitol has cut out his tongue so he can no longer speak. So he's been mutilated by the Capitol, and he no longer has a voice. He asks her to sing to the Mockingjays around them, and first she whistles Rue's 4-note tune. But the memories that tune has been a backdrop to are Rue's death, being chased by mutts to the cornucopia in the first games. Those memories threaten to overtake her, so she asks Polox, would you like to hear a real song? She sings The Hanging Tree at the lake where its author was murdered by the man responsible for all of Katniss's suffering. She says Peeta's right. The birds do fall silent when she sings, just as they did for her father. The lyrics of The Hanging Tree, when read in full, present a man calling out for his lover to run while he's about to be executed for the death of 3 folks. But the third stanza of the song suggests that the real flight would come in the form of death, so we can both be free of this oppression. The man in the song is calling for his lover to join him in the tree. We know that Lucy Gray authored this song in response to Arlo Chance's execution that Snow and Sejanus performed peacekeeping at, but it's also relevant because Katniss identifies the song in a pretty extreme way. She also, at times, has wished Peeta dead rather than being in the hands of the Capitol. Isn't that why she had the syringe in the hoverplane at the end of Catching Fire?
She grabs a syringe and she's going to try to find Peeta to kill him before the people of the Capitol can torture them.
Isn't that why she held out the berries? So hopefully Snow pooped his pants when he heard Katniss singing that song. They walk through the district, and Katniss wonders why her and Gale are always at odds now. It's Gale. It's Gale's fault that they're at odds. She says somehow, she's sure, if you trace it all back, her actions would be at the heart of it. Or maybe Gale's lack of action or willingness to use his words and communicate like an adult. I don't know. They pass through the bakery, which is demolished, nothing left of the smoking wreckage, and Katniss appeals to Peeta. She says, Peeta, you're calling for a ceasefire? There's no one left to hear you. They return to Katniss's house in Victor's village, and they're standing in Katniss's kitchen, and what does Gale say? Remember, this is where you kissed me? This is my house, man. She says, I didn't think you'd remember that. She hoped he wouldn't remember that. And Gale says, maybe I'll be like the man in the hanging tree, waiting for an answer. Forever. And he's freaking crying. Katniss leans over and kisses him, and he says, I knew you'd do that. Cool, so you're admitting to the manipulation. Thank you. At least you said it out loud. Because he's learned that Katniss can't handle the people she loves being in pain, so she'll do whatever it takes to stop that pain. Which is why the Peeta and Gale thing is so hard, because both love her, and the only way to quell both of their pain is to be with both of them, but she doesn't really want to be with either of them. So basically Gale manipulated her, and after she kisses him, he says, don't worry, Katniss, it'll pass. They return to 13, and Boggs finds Katniss and says that she should disregard her schedule and she needs to report to command. And she's like, done. He's like, did you follow your schedule at all today? She's like, no. We get the sense that maybe folks keep going to bat for Katniss. And she's like, well, I'm mentally disoriented. See? But when she holds up her wrist, there's no bracelet there that says she's mentally disoriented. And she's like, see, I'm so disoriented, I didn't even notice they took my bracelet. The reason she's been called to command is because the president is having a live briefing. On TV is President Snow in his mansion, and next to him is Peeta. She says there's a look in his eyes. It's angry and unfocused. BT and the folks of the Capitol are waging an airtime battle. So sometimes there are little clips of Katniss in her propos, and sometimes it flashes back to the president. They're fighting for control of the airways. Peeta, eventually, waging an internal battle of some kind, shouts to the camera, you, in 13, dead by morning. And then there are the sounds of Peeta being beaten on television. His blood splatters across the camera, and the Capitol broadcast cuts out. Part 2, the assault. The scream begins in my lower back and works its way up through my body, only to jam in my throat. Haymitch clarifies to the rebels sitting around the table that don't seem to be doing anything with the information that Peeta just took several blows to impart to them, that clearly that was the boy warning District 13 that an attack is on the way. They say a variety of things, like, how do you know? Why should we trust him? And Haymitch says, they're beating him bloody right now for giving you that information. That's how you know it's real. Coin makes the call that they will in fact trust Peeta's information. Apparently, District 13 does bomb drills every now and then, and Katniss, in the short month, 6 weeks that she's lived there, has been through 2. But she said neither of those bomb drills have prepared her for the ear-piercing, fear-inducing singing sirens that permeate the entirety of 13 when this drill goes off. Kat makes her way down, 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 down into the bunker that all the citizens of District 13 are expected to go to. She's always had a fear of the underground and being buried alive. She gets a claustrophobic feeling in her chest that she's described to us every single book because her father was buried alive, because he died in a mining accident. Once she's reached the sub-level bunker compartment that she's supposed to be at, Plutarch finds her, and he says, "Hey, listen, I know this is a bad moment for you, given what just happened with Peeta." He said, but you should know, people are looking to you. People are going to be watching you to decide what they should do and how they should act. So if you're brave and strong, they will be brave and strong. And Katniss is like, awesome, Plutarch. Why don't I just pretend I'm on camera all the time? He's like, great, that's a great idea. With that disregarded, Katniss decides to follow the instructions that have been printed in her little compartment thing. And the first step is to go secure her family's packs. They have supplies like toothbrushes and whatnot, and so she sets out the packs, the bedrolls, she makes it, and she waits for her family, which feels very reminiscent of the preparations she made in the Hunger Games. Katniss gets basically immediate evidence to what Plutarch has said, recognizes that other people do seem to be modeling their behavior or their decisions on her. Katniss's mom eventually arrives, but she doesn't have Prim with her, and they were dismissed at the same time, so Katniss is very concerned. Katniss attempts to think like her prey, and she thinks, where would she go, where would she go? And of course, she went back to their uppermost compartment for Buttercup, the cat. Katniss starts running toward the enormous metal doors that are about to seal themselves shut at the bottom of this bunker, and she knows that as soon as those doors close, nothing in the world will convince those people to open back up the doors. But Prim has not arrived yet. She is screaming and barreling toward these doors, shoving anyone she has to out of the way. When she gets there, she puts her hand in between a couple-inch gap, and she hears Prim and Gale calling just a few steps away. The doors open a little wider, and she shoves her entire body through them, terrified that they're going to shut them without Gale and Prim inside. And then eventually, all three of them do make their way back inside the bunker. She tells us she tries to appear extra calm to make up for her erratic screaming earlier, and then Coin comes on the intercom and says that the reason that they're doing this bomb drill is because they've been tipped off by former victor Peeta Malark that maybe there's an incoming assault on District 13. And that's when the first bomb hits. They are under strict lockdown, and this is obviously not a drill. The bunker shutters with each bomb that gets dropped. Katniss immediately thinks, we're going to die. They're very, very far underground, and all the walls are shaking, and all she can think of is being buried alive by stone. Though District 13 is largely underground, it's definitely not impervious to aerial assault, right? It's very easy to damage the compartments or the farming units that were closer toward the earth, closer toward the, surface. So the bombs are definitely doing damage. Being underground does not mean that these folks are safe. Their big fear is that the entire city will just collapse on top of them. Katniss's mom says, thank goodness Peeta had the wherewithal to warn them. And she thinks, yes, wherewithal, a great word. He not only had the knowledge, but the opportunity and the courage. President Coin's voice comes back on the intercom, and she says, apparently, Peeta's information was sound. District 13 owes him a debt of gratitude. Katniss and Prim wait out the raid for 3 days with the rest of the people inside of the bunker. It's an extremely dank and dark space. We learn that Prim is being trained to be a doctor, and that she likes District 13 because she doesn't have to worry about Katniss in the same way that she does when they were in District 12. Meaning that they do have to worry about her sanity and her mental faculties being intact, but they don't have to worry about her being murdered by the president. Katniss, once she is no longer preoccupied with their immediate death, is very worried about the assault that Peeta is now sustaining at the hands of the Capitol because he delivered this information to the people of District 13. She's worried that they're going to kill him. And Prim says, Katniss, I don't think Snow's going to kill Peeta. As long as Snow knows he can hurt you by hurting Peeta. Katniss says she experiences a piercing sort of pain near her heart. She asks Prim what they're going to do to Peeta then. Whatever it takes to break you. So they spend a full 3 days underground in the bunker with Katniss mulling over the question, what would it take to break me? The bombs keep coming, but they don't seem designed to demolish District 13. And Coin believes that's because President Snow and the Capitol would like to reacquire it full time, and you don't destroy something that you hope to own later. Again, Snow's family assets were in nuclear energy, and thus I believe Snow feels a certain possessiveness over District 13 and isn't destroying it to his own detriment because he wants to repossess it later. Katniss and Buttercup have a game that they've called Crazy Cat. Katniss invented it on a particularly dark and dreary winter. The way the game works is she holds a flashlight up to a spot and Buttercup tries to catch the light, but it's impossible to catch the light. This makes Katniss and Buttercup pretty popular in the bunker, and people have started to smile at her more after her whole pushing people aside and shoving them to the ground to try to get to Prim thing. She says what makes Buttercup really crazy is not if she moves the light around. It's not even turning off the light, because if she turns off the flashlight, Buttercup moves on. He thinks about other things. But it's when she holds shines the light on a spot on the wall where he just can't reach that drives him actually crazy. He'll never move on because he's always looking at it, but he'll never be able to reach it. This is when Katniss has sort of a moment of epiphany where she recognizes that this is what Snow is doing to her. Snow holding the flashlight, which is Peeta, and Katniss being Buttercup. If Snow were to kill Peeta, the flashlight would turn off, and Katniss would move on. It's his torment of Peeta that keeps Katniss crazy, paralyzed, and immobile. Katniss goes to Finnick in the dead of night to discuss her newfound understanding. Because he obviously understood this from the get-go, he's known that this is what they're doing to Annie, the love of his life, so that's why he can't focus or function now. And guess what? In order to walk to Finnick's bunker compartment, she has to pass by Gale, and guess who finds that suspicious? Freaking Gale. Gale literally thinks there's something going on between Finnick and Katniss. And if there was, what freaking business would it be? When Katniss explains all this, Finnick says it's best to hold yourself together because pulling yourself together takes about 10 times longer than falling apart. And he tells her that he misjudged her, and he knew he'd misjudged her as soon as they were in the Quarter Quell arena. She loves Peeta, and that's really clear to anyone paying attention. She says that in the games, under that hot pink sky, with Peeta's life in limbo, perhaps she finally did convince President Snow that she loves him, and in doing so, handed him the weapon that he needed to break her. Eventually, they're led out of the bunker, and the Mockingjay team asks Finnick and Katniss to do some propos, to send out to the capital and the nation of Panem to say that they survived the aerial assault that took place. Katniss notices Gale giving her and Finnick dirty freaking looks, and she's like, you know what? Whatever. Snow has Peeta, Gale can think what he wants. And about goddamn time. These are very serious circumstances. Oh my god. And you want to know why Gale won't let Katniss have another male friend? Why he's not comfortable with her confiding in any men? We learn that it's September and that Snow has had Peeta in his clutches for 5 to 6 weeks. Boggs tells Katniss that Peeta's warning actually did make a really big difference. They had an extra 10 minutes heads up. And 10 minutes did mean saved lives. Namely, Prim and Gale didn't come into the bunker until moments before the first bomb was dropped. Without Peeta's warning, they wouldn't have made it. When they come outside of 13 and they're assessing the wreckage of the bombing, they come across dozens of red and pink roses. These are roses for a pair of lovers. They're designed to unhinge Katniss. And they do. She is unable to perform. It's impossible to be the Mockingjay, believing that no matter what she does, believing that her actions are indirectly translating to blows that land on Peeta's skin. Plutarch's like, what's wrong? Why can't you say the line? And Finnick says she's figured out how Snow's using Peeta. And Katniss says she thinks she hears a collective sigh around the semicircle. She'll only accept comfort from Haymitch. He holds her and he pats her and he says, it's okay, sweetheart. It's gonna be okay. She's broken down. She's sobbing. It's my fault. She gasps for air. My fault. And if there's one thing we can learn about having insight into multiple Victor's stories, it's that when we're reading it, hopefully it feels really clear to us that it's not Katniss's fault. Just like it wasn't Haymitch's fault that the cistern was dry. She's sedated, and when she wakes up, she learns that Plutarch has convinced the people of District 13 that it is worth the cost to attempt a rescue mission on Peeta and the other Victors. They've sent in a rescue team to get Peeta and all the other Victors that have been held hostage by the Capitol. They didn't go at first because it was risky and costly, but they've decided that they can't lose the Mockingjay now, so they're going. And of the people sent out on that team, I bet you can guess who went. Who volunteered first? It's Gale. Katniss is now terrified that she could very possibly lose them both, or more likely that they'd both be in the hands of President Snow and thus both used against her. She imagines a world where both their voices have ceased, both their hands stilled. A tremendous void of pale gray nothingness is all that her future holds without them. Haymitch asks if she'd like to be sedated until they return from the mission. And she says he's not joking. This is a man that spent his life at the bottom of a bottle.
And he tells us that he ends up hitting the bottle and then hitting the bottle even harder.
Rather than face the crimes of the Capitol. And for the first time ever, she wonders how Haymitch got to be the way he did. The 16-year-old boy who won the Quarter Quell. He must have had people he loved. Family, friends.
Sid is 10 years old. One of the only things that we really get to learn about Sid is that he loves the sky and he loves the outdoors.
A sweetheart, maybe.
And while Lenore Dove will forever be my true love, Luella is my one and only sweetheart.
That he fought to get back to. Where are they now?
His mother and Sid have been burned alive.
Katniss begs for a job. She says she can't just sit here and wait for them to come back or maybe be dead. So they decide to launch an airtime assault on the Capitol's airways as a sort of distraction, a decoy. And what they're going to need to do that are long things to air. So they're going to tell stories. Katniss sits in front of a camera and does what Haymitch has been begging her to do since the first Hunger Games. She opens up. She talks to the camera about Peeta and the bread, about the love that they've had for one another. And she ends by saying she knows now that because of what the president is doing to Peeta, that's how she knows that the rebellion must go on, that the revolution must take place. She says the capital is completely dependent on the districts. And today is the day she declares her independence. Finnick goes next. It's really windy. After being cautioned by Haymitch that he doesn't have to do this, but he does. He tells the entire nation that President Snow used to sell him his body. He wasn't the only one. If a victor is considered desirable,
But Katniss, despite her score of 11, has to become desirable.
the president gives them as a reward or allows people to buy them for an exorbitant amount of money. Katniss feels immediate shame for the judgments and terrible thoughts that she's ever had about Finnick. Obviously, Finnick didn't have real lovers in the capital, just horrible people he'd been sold to and forced to play a role in the same way that she was. She says Finnick was bought and sold. Handsome, sure, but a slave nonetheless. Apparently, the elites of the capital that Haymitch was sold to used to sometimes feel bad or want to give him something extra, so what they would do is they'd tell him secrets, right? Like, who's he gonna tell and who would believe him? Well, Finnick's telling everybody now. So, he weaves a tapestry of incest, backstabbing, blackmail, and arson. And Katniss thinks, wow, like, if a bad haircut can lead to hours of gossip in the capital, people are gonna be talking about this forever. Then, Finnick gets to the really important stuff. The secrets about our president, good old Coriolanus Snow. Finnick points out case after case of mysterious death that has followed the president's career. I wonder if he points out Lucy Gray. Probably not. Mayfair, maybe. We don't get an exact transcript of what Finnick says, but we would probably like one. So, enemies of Snow and allies who had potentials to become threat that seemingly drop dead out of nowhere. Snow has a list, and no one knows who's on it next. We learn that Snow uses poison. This is his weapon of choice, perhaps starting with rat poison and Lucy Gray. But to avoid any suspicion, he will also drink from the poisoned cup. He will also eat the poisoned oysters. Although he's kept alive by various antidotes, he's never fully healed, so his mouth has all these open sores in it. That's why he always smells like blood, and he uses his overly perfumed, genetically modified roses to compensate for the smell. That's why Katniss can smell blood on his breath. Katniss wonders if she would have suffered the same fate as Finnick. And she says, everyone wants my kisses. She certainly was considered desirable. She asked Haymitch if that's what happened to him, and Haymitch said no. My mother, my brother, my girl were all dead within 2 weeks of me being crowned victor. He says, I was the example for the Finnicks, the Joannas, and the Cashmeres. They take to the airways, and the assault goes through. Katniss even wonders if while BT is, like, waging this airtime assault for, the Capitol network, is BT getting better at his strategy, or are the people of the Capitol maybe not working as hard to keep him out because they want to hear what Finnick has to say? Because Finnick's account is so interesting and revealing. Eventually, the rebels have returned. Haymitch comes to Finnick and Katniss to share the news, and he says, I don't have any other news but that. They're in the hospital. They all run toward the hospital, and Finnick and Annie immediately reunite. They reunite as if there are no other people in the world, and she finds herself jealous for a moment of their certainty, of their knowing that they are supposed to be together, and of their ability to perform affection without it having any alternative meanings. No wonder about guilt and performance. So Peeta is here in the hospital. Maybe not well, but alive and away from Snow. She wonders what she'll say to Peeta. She hadn't really let herself think about it because she hadn't let herself consider this moment. She hadn't let herself hope for reunification with this man, with this boy. She thinks, it doesn't matter what I say. We'll probably be kissing anyway. What? Gale is fine. I forgot to say, Gale is fine. She sees him in the hospital. He's there too. She spots Peeta with a trio of doctors, and she's a little bit disappointed that her face wasn't the first one he saw when he woke up. This feels like choosing to me. This feels like she's made a choice. She runs to meet him. Her arms are open for an embrace. Her lips are just forming to say his name when his fingers lock around her throat. Peeta attempts to strangle Katniss, and Boggs has to knock him out. So yes, part 2 is called The Assault. Because of the area assault that the Capitol sent to District 13, because of the beating that Peeta took to impart that information transformation, but also for the way that Peeta attempts to strangle Katniss, and for the assault that is on these two people's souls. Katniss wakes up later and she's been ordered not to speak. She has some sort of metal collar around her neck that is meant to safeguard her bruised larynx? I don't know how to say the word. She's unable to speak, so when Plutarch gives her updates on Peeta's condition, it's Prim that asks the questions. The rebels deduce that Peeta has been hijacked by President Snow in the Capitol. This is so horrible. They would sting him with trackerjacker venom, a powerful and terrifying hallucinogen, and then show him images of Katniss from the games, or other disturbing images, ultimately programming him to be a fear, aggression bomb, with Katniss as his focal point. They've used fear conditioning to program Peeta against Katniss, to make him believe that she's a threat, a weapon, a mutt. The rebels will, of course, try to heal him, but BT explains that our fearful memories are our most powerful ones, and often stick with us longest, are thus the hardest to root out. And that's for a particular reason. This is ultimately because when faced with any trauma, the body releases a lot of adrenaline and cortisol, and these two chemicals have a really intense effect. They tend to sharpen our perception and make it feel like time is slowing down. Our body does this to help us survive in the face of something life-threatening. We need more time and we need more detail in order to save our own lives in those moments. But it also has the effect of making our traumatic memories the sharpest memories that we have, our most intense memories. It can also sort of create the feeling that nothing but that trauma was even real. So that's why it will be particularly difficult to restore Peeta to his lovely self. Katniss thinks of Peeta as deranged. The rebels don't really have hope that he'll ever be the same. And Plutarch gets a little bit fed up with everyone. He's like, why is everyone so down? We have Peeta now. Snow doesn't have him anymore. This is a huge improvement on our situation. You guys, see the bright side. And everyone's like, what the f-? And in that, while he's trying to pep everyone up with that speech, he says Peeta's prep team and stylists were executed on live television this afternoon, and no one's even heard from Effie Trinket. The fact that we have Peeta is really big deal. Big wins, big gets. And at the news of hearing that Portia has been murdered on TV, and that no one knows Effie Trinket's whereabouts, Katniss starts to panic and they have to sedate her. Prim later urges Katniss not to give up on Peeta, the version of him that loves her. Prim says that version might come back to you. One day, Katniss finds her way down to special weaponry, which is where Gale and BT spend a lot of time, and BT makes this offhanded comment about, like, I feel guilty about keeping Gale away from you, and Katniss is like, I don't care. We don't exactly, like, get along when we hang out. Like, whatever. But it's an interesting comment. They show Katniss a snare that they've designed. This particular snare that they've designed endangers their prey's offspring in order to lure out the real target, the parents, luring the victims into what appears to be a safe haven and what is actually a death trap. They are focusing on human impulses like compassion. Katniss says, I guess there isn't any rule book for what might be unacceptable to do to another human being. And Gale says, sure there is. BT and I are using the same rulebook as President Snow, which is ultimately, okay, just to put it in context, him saying that is the same thing as Ron being like, well, we're using Voldemort's playbook, so, like, truly. It's like, well, then we've probably missed the point then, right? The rebels have found Deli Cartwright, who is also wonderful. She's one of the only people of town that managed to escape to District 13. She is not at all connected to Katniss, so the rebels are going to use her to experiment on the hijacked Peeta to see what his reaction to her will be. Deli tells Katniss that Peeta and her have known each other their whole lives. They played together as children. She used to tell people he was her brother. Katniss tells us Deli Cartwright has a tendency to see the best in people, because Deli says to Haymitch and Katniss that Katniss was always so amazing that she never expected to be noticed by Katniss. Everyone admired her so. And Katniss and Haymitch both wait to see if she's joking, but she's not. And Katniss says, well, Deli's spun things in a way that is not the truth. She's making it seem like I didn't have any friends because people were intimidated by me, when the truth was I didn't have any friends because I'm not friendly. And I'm wondering if both those things can be true. So the only link between Deli and Peeta and Katniss is from the first games, when Katniss identified the Avox girl and Peeta came to her rescue. And Peeta says, oh, she's a dead ringer for Deli. That's probably why you thought you knew her. Obviously, the Avox girl didn't look anything like Deli. It was just Peeta being kind and saving Katniss when he didn't have to. And so Plutarch's like ever the optimist. He's like, well, let's give it a shot. What could go wrong with such a pleasurable companion as Deli? Deli. So despite Deli being very delicate and very kind and trying to maneuver Peeta away from the conclusions that he's arrived at, which is that Katniss is a mutt and responsible for the death of his entire family, he very quickly arrives at District 12 was burned down because of Katniss. And Katniss is like, cool, so not only does he hate me, he no longer thinks I'm human. She says it was less painful being strangled. Then she's immediately like, Prim was wrong. Peeta is irretrievable. And the reason that she's so quick to give up on Peeta, because she thinks it was a fluke that he loved her at all to begin with. She thinks that she is a capital mutt sent here to destroy Panem, programmed by the capital's violence. She thinks she is useless, uncooperative, and undesirable. She has been told by the people around her, but also by societal expectation, that he is too good for her. Not just by Haymitch, but by the circumstances. Because seam boys don't marry town girls unless something has gone completely wrong. Because her father was a seam boy and married her mother, and her mother's life was ruined for it. So it's not just societal expectation that has told her that it doesn't make any sense that Peeta loves her at all, but she does believe that he's far too good for her and there's nothing she could do to be worthy of him. So she doesn't think that the rebels will be successful in deconditioning him of his capital brainwashing, because she doesn't really buy that he's been brainwashed. She thinks that he's seeing her for who she really is. She thinks he's seeing her for how she sees herself. She thinks that order has been restored and now Peeta has the correct view of her. This is what makes her an unreliable narrator. This is one of the things that makes her an unreliable narrator. So Katniss is like, I cannot stand this. I need a mission away from District 13 because I can't stomach the thought of Peeta being in such close proximity and hating me. So she's sent to District 2, which Plutarch regards as a tough nut to crack. District 2 is the only district where fighting is still going on. So all the other districts have been taken by the rebels. The rebels are in control of all other districts except District 2. It's still going on because at the center of the district is an enormous mountain that houses the main military arsenal of the capital, and it's basically impenetrable. It's also going on because by other district standards, District 2 simply did not suffer the way that the other districts did. I wonder if this is also Strabo Plinth's influence. The people of District 2 are better fed, better prepared, and given mostly non-dangerous careers. They're still slaves in far more comfortable conditions, and thus more likely to swallow the capital's propaganda. So Katniss is in District 2, not really doing anything, but she is invited to military strategy meetings, and she appreciates that. She is relocated often for her safety, and she is expected to give game, because she's allowed to hunt in District 2, to whatever family happens to be housing her, as a token of thanks for the risk they're taking by housing her. She mourns Peeta, who she now considers dead. She says Snow has taken him and twisted him beyond recognition. Boggs even remarks that it was perhaps a little bit too easy to rescue Peeta and the other victors. He believes that if they hadn't gone on this rescue mission, that perhaps Peeta would have been delivered to District 13, tied up with a ribbon tagged with Katniss's name. She mourns his kind-heartedness, his steadiness, his warmth, and unexpected heat. She cannot put a name to the thing that she's lost, like lover, partner, boyfriend, friend, ally, but she knows she's lost it all the same. Plutarch calls with updates, and they are never really encouraging, but they're kind of like doused in Plutarchism. He was allowed to feed himself pudding today. And then Haymitch will get on the phone and basically admit that not a lot has changed, no new progress has been made, but they're attempting to hijack him back. Prim's idea. Prim is 13 years old. They're gonna hijack him back, so what they do is they give him a dose of a calming drug, and then they show him pictures of Katniss. And he's very, very confused, but that's better than homicidal aggression, so that's great news. Gale and BT are flown to 2 to help take down this final district in the war, and they're regarded as the brains. They're here to crack the nut, which the mountain has been nicknamed after Katniss relays Plutarch's tough nut to crack idiom to the rebels of District 2. When Gale and Katniss finally talk, Gale says, when I saw Peeta, I thought something selfish. And you just know, something stupid's coming. Ugh. And he says, I'll never compete with that amount of pain. That you'll never feel right about being with me if that's how he is. And Katniss says, just like how I never felt right about kissing him because of you. And Gale says, if I thought that was true, I could almost live with the rest of it. Bye. Go away. But he doesn't go away. His manipulation is actually immediately successful, because that night, Katniss finds herself wrapped in his arms, his lips pressed to the bruising on her neck. She admits to us that the reason she's kissing Gale is because she is horribly and desperately lonely. Gale can tell her heart isn't in it, and so he says that kissing her like that that is like kissing someone who's drunk. And she's like, have you ever kissed anyone who's drunk? Like, who the heck have you kissed? And he says, yeah, I used to kiss girls all the time, all around the district, on the slag heap, all around. And Katniss is like, okay, so when did I become so special? Right about when I got carted off to the Capitol? And he says, nope, about 6 months before. Darius was teasing you, talking to you about trading a rabbit for a kiss, and I realized I minded. She says, Darius was just joking around. And he says, well, you'd be the last to figure it out if he wasn't. And that's true. And he brings up Finnick again. And he says, I was starting to worry he had his eye on you, but he's back on track now. And Katniss is like, you don't know Finnick if you think he could love me. But I think the reason she's saying that is because she witnessed Finnick with the Jabberjays. Like, she's witnessed Finnick be a complete wreck, like basically not himself at all, lost inside of his skin because Annie is not around, which is also what happened to Katniss, actually. Anyway, he says he was desperate, and desperation makes people do crazy things. And Katniss, of course, takes this personally. Katniss is in a military meeting regarding strategy about how to crack the nut. It's being held by another victor of District 2. Her name's Lime. Gale comes up with a plan to use the mountain, debilitate the base, rather than take it. So he wants to trigger an avalanche on the mountain, thereby suffocating all those inside, condemning them to being buried alive. Someone says, well, the train tunnel would still be open for survivors. And Gale says, not if we blow it up. And everyone's like, oh. And people respond with apprehension because this is the good guys table. And Gale says, is that everyone's problem? That our enemies will have a few hours to reflect on the fact that they're dying rather than being blown to bits like the rest of our people have been? Gale, shares some of his trauma. He says, we watched children burn to death and there was nothing we could do. These are the people responsible for that. Later, Gale will ask Katniss if she thinks he's heartless. And she says, no, it's just that kind of thinking, I think, could justify any killing. You could justify sending kids to the games. And Gale says, it's really not like that. And she's like, maybe I've arrived at that conclusion because of all my trips to the arena. So a plan is decided. The train tunnel will be left open for evacuees to come out. An avalanche is triggered and Gale's plan exceeds everyone's expectations. It works really well. Katniss imagines the hell inside of the mountain. The sirens wailing, the lights flickering into darkness, stone dust choking the air, people slamming, shoving, screaming like ants as the hill presses in. It makes Katniss think of the day her father died. The sirens went off in school and she'd run to Prim's classroom and she found Prim sitting alone in a classroom, hands folded at her desk, waiting to be collected by Katniss, just like they discussed. They find their way to the mine and they end up looking for their mom, and she says she should have known something was wrong then because why were they looking for her and when the reverse should have been true? She says when it becomes clear that her father won't be one of the lucky ones that comes up. As a child, she sunk her hands into the cinders on the earth, knelt on the ground, and wanted so badly to pull her father free. Katniss is appalled that they've subjected people to this kind of death. Stone conquers people every time. Haymitch, in her earpiece, updates Katniss on the Peeta situation. He says he recognized the song The Hanging Tree. Katniss says he couldn't have recognized it. I've never sang it for him. And Haymitch says, no, he heard your father sing it when he came by to trade at the bakery. He remembers because he was specially listening to see if the birds stopped singing. I guess they did. My father seems to be everywhere today, dying in the mine, singing his way into Peeta's muddled consciousness. I miss him so badly, it hurts. Hours pass and no one comes out of the tunnel. Haymitch asks Katniss to give a speech because the mountain has fallen, all the districts have fallen, but the fighting is still going on. So if Katniss can stand up and ultimately say that the war is over, lay down your weapons, everything can end. As Katniss gets up to give her speech, a train pulls into the tunnel. A man falls out of a train cart. The train seems to be on fire itself, and the carts are belching smoke. Katniss thinks it's abhorrent to have guns trained on people that have just escaped this situation. And so when the first man stumbles out of the cart, Katniss rushes to his rescue, yelling stop at any soldiers that approach him with weapons. That man immediately drags himself up to his knees and trains his gun on Katniss and says, give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot. All of Panem is watching this moment. It's being broadcast. She says, I can't. We blew up your mine. You burned my district to the ground. But we have no fight except the one the Capitol gave us. Realizing what she's saying right now to the people of District 2, to the nation of Panem, is exactly what Peeta was trying to communicate to her on the roof of the tribute center during their first games. She hopes he's watching this now and he forgives her when she dies. Who is the enemy? These people are not your enemy. Then she watches herself get shot on television. She wakes up in the hospital in District 13.
I hear him whisper a word back, but I don't quite catch it.
Always. Peeta whispers the word and I go searching for him. Turns out Katniss's suit was bulletproof, so she just has some bruised ribs, no big. I think that's extremely painful. And she's now in adjoining hospital rooms with Joanna Mason from District 7. Joanna Mason, who cut out Katniss's tracker so that she could be rescued. Joanna Mason, who has been tortured for the last 6 weeks by the Capitol. Katniss and Joanna forge a friendship, and Joanna tends to steal Katniss's morphling supply, but Katniss is like, she deserves it, like, what the heck am I gonna say? say. So after filming a short Propos, showing off her stitches and bruising, and telling the people of the capital, we'll see you soon. She's basically done her Mockingjay duties. Plutarch says the capital will fall quite quickly because all they've known is Panem at circuses. He says it's a saying from thousands of years ago in a language called Latin from a place called Rome. It means that in return for full bellies and entertainment, people will give up their political responsibilities, thus their power. Finnick and Annie get married, and despite it being overblown by District 13 standards and extremely underdone by Plutarch's capital ones, the whole thing sounds really beautiful. Annie wears a gown designed by Cinna from Katniss's Victory Tour, and Finnick wears a suit, one of the suits that Peeta had worn. A choir of children sing. Nearly every single child in District 13 signs up. Katniss worries for them because clearly this is the first joyous event. They don't really make a lot of time and space for celebration or self-congratulation because they're an extremely militaristic space. There's not time. They're about efficiency, and celebration is deemed superfluous, I guess. But everyone from District 13 wants to participate. It's like a 300-person wedding. So a choir of children sing. A net woven from long grasses is draped over the couple while they say their vows, and they touch salt water to each other's lips before they kiss. After the official ceremony, Greasy Say pulls Gale onto the dance floor, which is a really cool insight into their Hob relationship, and Joanna scolds Katniss for missing an opportunity to show Snow her dancing. Katniss brings Prim onto the dance floor, and they're good partners because they've spent many dark winters dancing together. Eventually, 4 people roll in an enormous wedding cake, and Katniss recognizes that Haymitch has been holding out on her once again because clearly this has been done by the steady, gentle hand of Peeta Mellark. Haymitch says Peeta worked on it for days, and watching him work on it, it was almost like he was his old self. Haymitch communicates that Peeta has requested to see Katniss. She gets confused and upset by this because, one, she'd pretty much entirely written Peeta off, and she'd planned to go to the capital, assassinate Snow, and get herself taken out. She has no plans to live beyond the fall of this empire. And of course, she decides to go see him. She wishes she could meet with Peeta privately, but there's a team of doctors with clipboards behind a wall that looks like a mirror, and she has an earpiece in with Haymitch giving her instruction. When she walks inside, his eyes lock on hers instantly. He's reproachful and suspicious. He says, "You're not very big, are you? Or particularly pretty, either?" Katniss says, "Well, you've looked better." And not even remotely nice to say that to me after all I've been through. You were known for being the nice one, not me. He says, "Katniss, I remember about the bread." He says when he was a kid, he tried to catch Katniss's eye the next day, but he couldn't. And for whatever reason, he thinks she picked a dandelion. He said, "I must have loved you a lot, taking a beating to feed you." And she's like, "You did. And did you love me?" Everyone says I did. That's not an answer. He said, "I have a lot of confusing memories, and there's a lot of kissing in some of them. I watched back the footage, and the kissing doesn't seem very genuine on your part. Did you like kissing me?" And she says, "Sometimes. Do you know that there are people watching us now?" And the reason she says this, right? I think the old version of Peeta would have picked up on this, but this version of Peeta probably doesn't catch it, and that's okay. But the reason that she says this is because she is explaining her psychology to him. He remarks that it didn't seem genuine. And because we're inside of her head, we know it's because she felt extremely observed the entire time they were in the games, because they were being observed. They were on film, and it was being broadcast to the nation. Kissing and intimacy is obviously about intimacy. It's about being unsurveilled. It's about losing yourself in another person. And it couldn't be real or genuine with Peeta at those moments because she could not lose herself because she was surrounded by cameras or other people. So she's explaining that she was being weird then, like she's being weird now, because they have an audience, and she can't get out of the audience's head enough to be inside of her own trauma response. So it isn't accurate to say that the kissing wasn't genuine because she doesn't love or isn't attracted to Peeta. She's saying the kissing wasn't genuine because it was on TV. Peeta asks about Gale, and she says he's not a bad kisser either. And he says, "And we were both cool with that? You kissing both of us?" And she's like, "Well, not really, but I wasn't really asking your permission." And let me just say, the consent around some of these kisses is murky. Peeta laughs and says, "Well, you're a real piece of work, aren't you?" And that's not exactly an un-Haymitch-like response, but it is an extremely un-Peeta-like one. So she says, "Finally, all those months, I took it for granted that Peeta loved me and thought I was wonderful. Those are over. Remember in the first book, he'd just end up hating me later instead of sooner." At her core, Katniss believes she's unlovable. Finally, he can see me for who I really am. Violent, distrustful, manipulative, deadly. And I hate him for it. The rebellion is basically over everywhere except for the capital, and Katniss finds out that she's not being flown into the capital until after the rebels have fully secured it. And she's pretty furious about this. She's like, you need me! I'm the best shot you got! Which probably isn't true on both fronts because she is a child. She literally is like, well, why does Gale get to go? And they're like, Gale has shown up to every scheduled event he's supposed to be at. He's gone to training, he's gone to classes, he's attained an education. He is a soldier. You've made a point not to do those things. And she's like, shit, I did do that. So it's agreed that Katniss and Joanna will spend the next 3 weeks training and work their way up toward a simulation test of sorts. And if they pass that simulated exam, they'll be cleared to go to the capital when the rebels take it in 3 weeks. Joanna and Katniss are extremely out of shape, and that becomes clear very quickly, and they have to endure a lot of pain. Joanna has been being tortured for 6 weeks, and Katniss just got shot in the ribs, so they're quite wounded, but they persevere. They're victors, they tell themselves. They can do anything, and it turns out they can, because they do show up to training every single day. They run miles, they lift weights, they learn how to shoot and assemble guns, they do the whole shebang. They end up moving into a compartment together across the hall from Katniss's mom and Prim, because Joanna's like, everyone's viewing us as patients, as we can't come from the hospital every day. So Katniss's mother agrees to keep an eye on them, and they live together. Joanna accidentally opens one of Katniss's drawers with Katniss's stuff in it, and she slams it shut. Sorry. Katniss says, it's okay. You can look at my stuff if you want. It's the locket, the silver parachute, the spile, and the pearl. And Joanna spends time delicately examining each of these items because Joanna Mason does not have a single person or possession to her name. She is entirely alone. One evening during these 3 weeks, Katniss, Joanna, Finnick, Annie, and Gale, their whole crew, they're all eating together. And Finnick is telling a story about a sea turtle stealing his hat, and Katniss is laughing when she looks up and all of a sudden, who's there but Peeta? He's handcuffed and heavily guarded. He actually has to hold his tray with his fingertips because his cuffs are obscuring his ability to use his hands. And he says, I can't sit here unless you guys give me permission. And Joanna says, sure, sit on down. And she reveals that they were in adjoining cells in the capital, so they're very familiar with one another's screams. Peeta makes a weird joke about stealing Annie away from Finnick, and it's wrong for a number of reasons, but the main one is that Peeta is supposed to be obsessed with Katniss. He's supposed to be in love with Katniss, so the idea that he would have appreciation for any other woman, particularly the woman that he just made the wedding cake for, is very weird. The insinuation that he doesn't trust Finnick, really disconcerting to everyone. Finnick says, oh Peeta, don't make me sorry I restarted your heart. And he says for her, for the rebellion, not for me. And that's obviously correct, right? Because they didn't even bother to go try to rescue these people until it debilitated Katniss, so fair on Peeta's end. Then Peeta gestures toward Katniss and Gale and is like, so are you two officially a couple now, or are they still dragging out the star-crossed lovers thing? Still dragging. The slut-shaming that's coming from Peeta that's the terrifying part. Gale says, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it myself. And Peeta says, believe what? And Gale says, you. And Peeta says, can you be more specific? And Joanna says that they turned you into the evil mutt version of yourself. Katniss confides in Gale that maybe Peeta's just seeing her for who she really is. And Gale says, Katniss, as your oldest friend, trust me when I tell you, he can't see you for who you really are. Come on. Okay, so Katniss and Joanna eventually get recommended for the exam. It's designed to test your greatest weakness, so Katniss spends a few hours worrying about what her greatest weakness might be. And this whole situation seems to parallel with training, right? The way that she had to train in the last 2 books for the Hunger Games and eventually be tested by game makers. This simulation, I think, is meant to parallel to that test. She goes into the simulation, she gets the nagging sense that it's far too easy, but then she figures out that Command thinks her biggest weakness is that she can't take an order, so she takes an order despite the fact that she feels like she knows better on the mission, and she passes the exam. We find out that Joanna didn't pass because Joanna's biggest weakness at the moment is water. The Capitol used water to torture her, and now when she's faced with water, when she has to shower or walk through the rain, or when her simulation was flooded, she has panic attacks and pretty significant episodes of post-traumatic stress disorder wherein her realities become confused. So she doesn't pass, but Katniss does. She's stamped with Squad 451 and is told to go to Command to meet her team. Turns out she's been assigned a special squad of sharpshooters. Gale, Finnick, and 5 other rebels are on that team. And she's working directly under Boggs, and she's like, it wouldn't be very soldierly to jump up and down, but she's so excited. She's like, I get to be with my friends, I get to work under Boggs, this is best case scenario. But it turns out this squad is a special star squad, the behind the front lines, the on-screen faces of the invasion, so they won't see any actual combat if anyone can help it. Everyone's pretty upset about this. Boggs introduces this group of people to the Hollow, which is ultimately technological map that depicts the booby traps that the Capitol has laid out throughout the Capitol to try to thwart the rebels as they take the city. Those booby traps are called pods. So the holo, when you turn it on, it can only be activated by the person it's assigned to, which right now is Boggs, shows you all the known pods in the Capitol, but it doesn't show you all the unknown pods, and it's clear that the Capitol is making new pods every day. So it's guidance, but it's not a clear map. And Katniss and Finnick both notice that this holo, the image being shown to all of them right now, looks a hell of a lot like an arena. Ladies and gentlemen, whispers Finnick, "Let the 76th Hunger Games begin!" Katniss screams, and then she's like, oops, that's probably not convincing anyone that I'm sane. So she tries to lock it down. Katniss, in a really moving moment, goes out into the woods, and she builds Joanna a little bundle of the scents that probably remind her of home. District 7 is lumber, so that's what Katniss works with, and she brings the scents to Joanna. Joanna sniffs it and holds it close to her chest and makes Katniss swear on her family's life that she will assassinate Snow. Katniss and Squad 451 are moved to a rebel encampment. They shoot at things so that they blow up and they get it on screen. It's kind of really boring. They seem to be downgrading the footage of the Mockingjay from being this really powerful person to being something of a foot soldier, and Katniss recognizes that her role is becoming different, that District 13 is trying to portray her in a specific way to the citizens of Panem, and it's as a less powerful person than who she was when the rebellion was going on. Katniss has been devising a plan, basically since she found out the Star Squad isn't really going into the Capitol, to break off from her squad. She's going to go it alone, but she first has to figure out how to steal the holo from Boggs, and she tells us that would ultimately be like stealing his teeth. Like, he's pretty attached to this thing. It's the only guidance they have. Then, one day, with no guard, and a gun swinging from his shoulder, Peeta arrives, steps out onto the rebel encampment, sent by Coin, which means that Coin has decided that I'm of more use dead than alive. Part 3, The Assassin. Katniss says she's never seen Boggs angry. Not when she was defying his orders, not when she puked on him, and not even when Gale broke his nose. But he's angry when he returns from his call with Coin. He's angry because he's dedicated his entire life to a revolution and a movement that's supposed to promise a better world, and what is clear to everyone on Squad 451 is that Coin has sent Peeta to murder Katniss. Peeta is an extremely traumatized, volatile, and powerful person, and he has a tendency to target that aggression toward Katniss whenever he becomes overwhelmed. He's been programmed to assassinate her, and Coin has sent him without any sort of guards and armed with a weapon into a war zone where he is bound to be triggered over and over again. Boggs pulls Katniss aside and says, Coin doesn't like you. Never did. It was Peeta she wanted to rescue from the start. No one expects that Katniss will be a contender for post-war leadership, so she's not considered a threat in that way. But Katniss will throw support to someone. Boggs asks, would that person be Coin or someone else? And if the answer isn't immediately Coin, that poses a problem for the president of District 13. Katniss might be the single most influential, powerful person in the country at the moment. And now, there's only one thing she could do to aid the rebellion: die. Coin is willing to sacrifice the life of a child in order to maintain power. Boggs says, not on my watch. I'm planning for you to live a long life, Soldier Everdeen. Katniss says, why? Because you've earned it. Katniss said goodbye to everyone she loved before the second quarter quell. She released those people from her heart. She says she sits by herself, thinking of them one by one, releasing them like birds from the protective cages inside of me, locking the doors against their return, so that she could walk toward her death alone. Katniss detached herself from all of her family, every relationship she has outside of the ones connected to the games, outside of Haymitch and Effie and Cinna and Peeta. Even though Katniss has been sharing a compartment with her mother and sister, it certainly doesn't feel like before, because it never can be. I think a lot of this book is us experiencing Katniss as a shell of a person, a symbol, exclusive directives, and that's it. Katniss's modus operandi for the last 2 books has been to kill the right people and then to die. Squad 451 immediately builds a round-the-clock rotation to guard Peeta because 1, he is a civilian, he's not a soldier, he's not trained for combat, and 2, he is extremely volatile and super hostile. He's a danger. Katniss asks when her shift is, and Jackson, Boggs' second in command, says she didn't put her in because when the time came, she didn't really think Katniss could shoot Peeta. And Katniss says loudly so that no one knows how afraid she is or how alone she is or how hurt she is by this, so that she seems impervious to all going on around her. She says, I wouldn't be shooting Peeta. It would just be like shooting another Capitol mutt. Yikes, babe. Boggs tells Jackson to put her in the rotation. Gale asks Katniss if he wants her to kill Peeta. Katniss says she can deal with it, and Gale intuits that Katniss is going to take off at any moment. She says she can't stop him from coming with her. Katniss recognizes that she's getting a lot of unfriendly looks from the rest of her squad, and she wonders if it has something to do with the way she's treated Peeta. She gets a call from Haymitch, and he puts things into perspective for her. He says, look, Coin may have sent him there to kill you, but he doesn't know that. I think it's time you flip this little scenario in your head. If you'd been hijacked by the Capitol, is this the way that he would be treating you? No, it isn't. He would be trying to get me back at any cost. You and me, we had a deal to try to save him. Remember? Try and remember. Katniss realizes, with, of course, shame, her fixation with assassinating President Snow has allowed her to ignore the much more difficult, more present, more real problem, and that is that she's lost the love of her life despite the fact that he's standing in front of her. During the night of Katniss's first watch, her and Peeta sit in silence for an hour. Then Peeta says to Katniss, it must have been so exhausting for you, trying to decide whether to kill me or not. Back and forth, back and forth. Katniss thinks this feels quite unfair, and her first impulse is to lash out, but she reins it in. I never wanted to kill you, except when I thought you were working with the careers to kill me. Peeta expresses frustration that he can't figure out what's real and what's not, that he can't figure out how to classify Katniss in his mind. Friend, ally, lover, mutt. Finnick pipes up and says, then ask, Peeta. That's what Annie does. The whole squad assures Peeta that he can trust them. They're his squad. They tell him that he saved a lot of lives in 13, and that's not something that they're soon to forget. Suddenly, Katniss wants to tell Peeta everything about who he is and who she is and who they are, but she doesn't know where to start. And of course, she's surrounded by people. They're never alone. She's surveilled. Worthless. I'm worthless. Peeta turns to Katniss and says, your favorite color's green, right? That's right. And yours is orange. Like the sunset. You're a painter, you're a baker, you like to sleep with the windows open, you never take sugar in your tea, and you always double knot your shoelaces. Then she dives into her tent before she does something stupid like cry. Peeta and the squad play a game called Real, Not Real, wherein Peeta asks them questions and all of them answer to the best of their ability whether or not that thing has happened. Finnick is able to answer a lot of the questions that Peeta asked because he was a mentor in Peeta's first games and a tribute in the second one. He asks about events, he asks about innocuous things, and sometimes he asks about scenes and people. He reveals that Darius and Lavina, the Avox girl, we finally have her name, were tortured in front of him to hurt him. Katniss thinks they lost their lives because of me. They spend their time filming propos, shooting targets, walking down a strategically irrelevant apartment block. They're laughing because many of the sharpshooters, they have less than subpar acting abilities, and so when they try to emulate distress, it looks goofy. They're goofing around. They feel silly. In the middle of all this joy, Boggs accidentally steps on an unmarked pod and blows both his legs off. Katniss is the first to arrive to a now incapacitated Boggs. He grips Katniss's wrist and says, the hollow. His last act is to activate the hollow so that it responds to Katniss. He tells her to do what she came to do. Kill Peeta, she has to, but keep going. Several other pods are going off around them while they're having this conversation, and the entire crew needs to flee immediately or they'll perish in the name of the many threats that they are now facing. There's this black, oily matter spouting like a geyser from the street, covering the buildings in this impenetrable wall of darkness. All the squad is running toward an apartment building. Katniss and one of her crewmen are both hauling Boggs along the way and are fleeing toward higher ground, when all of a sudden Katniss is yanked backwards. She finds Peeta hovering over, about to smash his gun into her face. She rolls, and another member of the squad, Mitchell, comes to her defense. Peeta, not himself, fully entrenched in a traumatic episode, launches Mitchell into the street, wherein Mitchell sets off another pod and dies almost on impact. Katniss and Holmes are dragging Boggs into a building. Castor and Pollux carry a writhing Peeta between them. They stuff Peeta into a closet, and he slams his feet into the door over and over again. Boggs dies. Jackson tells Katniss to transfer clearance of the hollow to her. Katniss says, no, I can't do that. She says, I'm on a special mission from Coin to assassinate President Snow. No one really buys that story, though, because it's clear to all of them that Coin sent Peeta here to assassinate Katniss, so if that were true, why would she have done that? As evidenced by the last minute of their life, Jackson says, I don't believe you. Cressida and the camera crew say that it was actually true. Plutarch wants the assassination filmed, bring about a more efficient end to the war. And they sent Peeta because he spent 6 weeks in the president's mansion and will maybe know the layout. He can act as a guide. The remaining members of the squad decide to follow Katniss. They move about 5 blocks inward, and eventually they have to stop because their tracks will no longer be covered by all the different pod trigger attacks. They're camped out in a Capitol apartment, and all the TVs turn on automatically whenever there's any sort of mandatory announcement. You really can't skip these sorts of things. So the TV starts going off, and the Capitol plays the last hour of coverage for the entirety of the nation, announcing Katniss, Peeta, Finnick, and the rest of the crew crew to be dead. One of the camera crewmen notes that there doesn't seem to be any aerial footage, so they must be low on hovercrafts like their intel suggests. Now that the world thinks they're dead, they have to decide on their next move. Peeta says, "Your next move is obvious. You have to kill me." He's met with protests from everyone in the squad. He lays out the facts. He just murdered a fellow member of their squad. Maybe you think you'd be kinder to just dump me somewhere, but that's the same as leaving me in the hands of the Capitol. Not an option. Peeta pleads for at least a nightlock pill that they all have, but everyone's worried that he'd take it sooner rather than later. Katniss says, "It's not about you. You're necessary to this mission, so you're coming, or you're going to slow us down because we're going to knock you out and drag you along." The squad looks for food in the abandoned apartment and finds lots of canned goods squirreled away. The hoarding disgusts the rebels of District 13. They ask if this is even legal. The rebels say, "On the contrary, you'd actually be stupid not to stockpile like this." While the others go without? Yeah, that's how it works here. Gale says, "Fortunately for us, because we've got dinner." And Peeta, semi-subconsciously, hands Katniss a can of lamb stew. Says, "Here you go." It's her favorite dish from the Capitol, the one they sent her in the arena when they were in the cave. She says now this place tastes like the arena too. As evening falls, the Capitol seal plays on the TV screen, and the faces of Squad 451, in district descending order, flash across the screen, just as they do in the arena. Followed by a message from President Snow denouncing Katniss as the Mockingjay. He regards her as a poor, unstable girl. Who will the rebels be now without their leader? Then BT hits a switch and suddenly it's President Coin on screen. She introduces herself to Panem as the president of District 13 and identifies herself as the leader of the rebellion. She says that Katniss Everdeen will remain the face of this revolution, dead or alive. The footage switches back to President Snow, and he says, "Tomorrow we'll pull her body from the ashes, and we'll see Katniss Everdeen for who she really is. A girl who could save no one, not even herself." And something that we have insight into because Collins gifted us the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the reason that Snow understands the shame of letting down those you love and the pain of losing those you love is because of Tigress and Lucy Gray. Through his own emotionally stunted logic, we have watched him arrive at the conclusion that it is too dangerous and too vulnerable to love people. By the time he's arrived under Dr. Gall's care, he's decided that he'll never love anyone again because that love will be used against him by the people he loves themselves or otherwise. Caring about people represents a weakness because intimacy requires vulnerability and trust. And Snow prides himself on not being able to trust or connect with anyone in order to maintain power. We pity him. We understand this to be an extremely shallow and empty human existence. It's the reason he uses people's loved ones against them. That's why he's phrasing his final slanderous blow in a way that blames her for the death of all the people around her. Because he understands, he knows what he's doing. They're getting closer to the city center, and the number of pods that are showing up on the Hollow have increased dramatically in number. Through some troubleshooting, they decide to move underground through the sewers. Peeta protests again, begging them to shoot him, pleading for death. They insist that he carry on. We find out that Polacks worked the tunnels below the city for 5 years and didn't see the sun the entire time until him and his brother were able to buy his way out. When the crew finds out this information, Peeta says something comforting and warm, and that's different because it's Peeta seeming like himself. After 6 hours of running through the tunnels, around 3 a.m. they find a utility closet to sleep in for a minute. While everyone sleeps, except Polacks, Katniss and Peeta have a conversation, and it ends in Peeta asking, "You're still trying to protect me, real or not real?" Real. Katniss dozes and wakes to the sounds of mutts programmed specifically to target her, hissing her name through the sewers and through Peeta. Eventually, we find out that the mutts weren't just programmed to target Katniss. They overhear the human cries of the mutts attacking anyone they come across down here. The mutts are lizard creatures that reek of blood and roses. Katniss and her crew run through many pods and lose many team members along the way. Masala, Jackson, League One, Castor. Eventually, they're attempting to fight their way above ground. Finnick is left behind, fighting his way through the lizard mutts, while Katniss, Peeta, Polacks, Cressida, and Gale escape. Peeta is extremely triggered, above ground and now safe for the moment. His pupils have dilated so that his blue irises have all but vanished. He says, "Leave me, once more, I cannot go on." Katniss keeps thinking that if she has to abandon or kill Peeta, Snow will officially have won. So she kisses him, knowing that she's risking her own death. "Don't let him take you from me. Stay with me, always." They run for cover and knock on the first door they see. A Capitol civilian opens the door and opens her mouth to scream, and Katniss shoots her immediately. Katniss is like, "Damn, I guess I'm taking out unarmed civilians now." Cressida says she knows a place, but it's not ideal. That's how Katniss ends up in the basement compartment in Tigress's fur underwear store. Katniss says Tigress is an extreme example of surgical enhancement gone wrong. She says her face is now a grotesque feline mask. Katniss says she remembers Tigress vaguely. She used to be a stylist in the Hunger Games, a younger, less altered version of her. She wonders if this is where stylists go to wait for death. sad theme underwear shops. The people of the capital have been conditioned to shame. That's why they're always changing their appearance to suit current trend, regardless of how ridiculous, impossible, or harmful that trend may be. They've been taught to be ashamed of being human, or of having leg hair, or an unmade up face, rather than to feel shame to have been witness to such atrocity, to have derived pleasure and entertainment from the deaths and the horrors that befell their fellow citizens, to be comfortable and feel a sense of superiority that they are not the exploited ones inside of this equation, not ashamed of the bets they take on the children they force to kill one another, but ashamed of the wrinkles on their face. Katniss tells Tigress, because she's quite worried that this is a trap, that she's definitely going to kill Snow. If only she knew. Tigress seems to smile. Peeta seems to be coming back to himself, repeating lines from various Hunger Games. He tells Katniss that he is so tired. Katniss counts every death on her fingers and feels pinned under an enormous amount of guilt and shock. She's basically in disbelief that her entire unit is gone. Many of them went underneath the tunnels and not very many of them came out. She apologizes to the remaining squad and comes clean about how there's not actually a secret mission from President Coin. And everyone's like, yeah, Katniss, we know. Katniss is like, we're gonna have to answer to the authorities, Plutarch, Coin, and Cressida says, trust me, Plutarch's thrilled. That's because he doesn't care who dies. They all assure her that everyone followed her into combat, knowing exactly who they were following, Katniss. She asks Peeta what he thinks. He says, I think you still have no idea the effect you can have. She doesn't know why his voice reaches her when no one else's can. City circle wise, they're close to the president's mansion, but he's been under closer lock and key since Finnick aired his dirty laundry, so they're trying to come up with a new plan. How are they going to assassinate the president if they can't get to him? Katniss says, okay, here's the plan. I'll surrender. They're obviously going to want to execute me publicly, and so Snow will probably come out for the execution. Gale can take out Snow. Bada bing, bada boom, done. And everyone's really like, whoa. Peeta's like, that's a pretty extreme solution to jump to. Let's pocket that one for now. And Katniss says she doesn't really care what they say because she's going to be the person that decides if she gives herself up, regardless of whether or not anyone gives her permission. So they're inside Tigress's basement bunker compartment and Katniss falls asleep and Peeta and Gale have a very Eclipse-esque conversation, and I looked it up. Eclipse did happen first, so about Katniss and who they think she'll choose. And they seem to agree, for the first time ever, that Katniss is going to end up with whoever she can't survive without. Katniss finds a way to be offended by this. Katniss can spin any situation into how she has personally let somebody down. She's like, damn, that's not very romantic. I'll just conduct an unfeeling assessment of who can meet my needs, who will extend my longevity. She's like, fine, well, right now I can survive just fine without either of you. So I don't know, because I can't live without someone is the romantic thing that most people say. It's possible Katniss would have been offended no matter what they said. But the reason they're saying that is because everyone around Katniss needs Katniss. It's important to need people. It's normal. It's human. It's community. So the capital has called on its citizens to move inward because the rebels are starting to take the outskirts of the city. So all of the citizens of the capital are now considered evacuees as they flee closer and closer to the city center. The people of the capital seem particularly ill-prepared for any sort of hardship, really, but particularly for these circumstances. Despite the fact that it's midwinter, many leave their homes in nightgowns, slippers. One guy is just holding an old banana. The capital has asked people that reside in the choicier apartments closer to the city center to open their doors to X refugee per square footage of their home. And the people, big shock, have not been so quick to welcome in their neighbor. Peacekeepers are now going door to door, relocating citizens and forcing owners of the city apartments to let these people in. Because Tigress's shop might end up being one of these places that refugees are located, the rebels decide they need to move. Gale and Katniss agree that Peeta is too unpredictable to take with them on this final mission. Peeta is really rational about their suggestion, and just when Katniss is thinking, great, you'll stay here, you'll hide out the rest of the revolution, and you'll be safe and fine, and I can come get you after, Peeta decides to go out on his own. While they were at Tigress's, one of the things they saw on the news was someone who looked like Peeta was beaten to death by a crowd of evacuees. And he didn't really look like Peeta, he just had blonde curls. So Peeta wants to go out, create some sort of distraction when he can be useful. After a long look, Gale hands over his own nightlock to Peeta, just in case he gets apprehended. And Peeta says, what about you? And he says, well, I have Katniss. Before long, Katniss and Gale make their way toward the city center in a crowd of evacuees headed toward the president's mansion. Evacuees start accidentally triggering pods in the streets. Why didn't the Capitol deactivate the pods? It was willing to sacrifice their own people. The rebels arrive. Unfortunately, the rebels are not entirely accurate with their targeting, and several civilians and children are collateral damage to their gunfire. One of the pods that gets activated cracks the street in half, and it folds in on itself, revealing a fiery hell pit with little demon creatures inside of it, claiming victims that fall into the pit, so the whole street is turned sideways. Like, what the heck, Suzanne? Katniss says everything that moves is a target. There's rebel fighting all around her, there are evacuees fleeing their homes, the street has cracked in half. It's actually Katniss's attempt to help Gale that gets him apprehended by a peacekeeper. He's shouting something at her that Katniss can't make out. Shoot me. That's what he was mouthing. Shoot me. Katniss keeps moving toward the city circle, toward the president's mansion. She says people are sitting around wailing, some just letting snow pile up on them. I think their ill-preparedness as it relates to their evacuation and their impotence when it comes to the civilians that have arrived in the circle is meant to call attention to how unresourceful the people of the Capitol have become because all of their needs have been met and everything has been handed to them. They're completely unhelpful. They are impotent. Even though they were treated much better than district folk, they are not better off for it. They are not stronger for it. In fact, they're worse off for it. At the president's mansion, peacekeepers have started assembling a human shield of children under the guise of giving them refuge. A hovercraft marked with a capital shield flies overhead, and parachutes like those that promise gifts in the arena rain down on these children. Tiny hands reaching fingers to the sky. The hovercraft vanishes, 5 seconds pass, and then the parachutes explode. Many children die on impact, but others lie in agony. Rebel medics sweep onto the scene. They swarm in among the children, wielding medical kits. First, Katniss sees the blonde braid down her back. Then, as she yanks off her coat to cover a bloody child, Katniss notices the ducktail formed by her untucked shirt. I have the same reaction as the day that Effie Trinket called her name out in the raping. Prim. Katniss runs toward the barricade, almost there, when the rest of the parachutes go off. Real or not real, I am on fire. Who will come to be known as the girl on fire. This is no place for a girl on fire. The girl on fire burns on. A fire mutt knows only a single sensation: agony. Eventually, Katniss's consciousness, after a battle with wings, flames, and water, reluctantly focuses on reality. Eventually, I am forced to accept who I am, a badly burned girl with no wings, no fire, and no sister. Katniss is in a Capitol hospital being treated for burns. She says the morphling they pump into her opens the door for the dead and alive alike. She describes visits from Haymitch, Cinna, Delhi, her father singing the hanging tree, and her mother sleeping in a chair. Katniss is visited by President Coin, who says, "Don't worry, I saved him for you." Katniss finds herself unable to speak for any physically diagnosable reason. Doctors regard it as emotional trauma that has rendered her a mental avox. Katniss asks no questions, but people bring her lots of information anyway. Snow is held captive and awaiting trial in the Capitol. Gale took 2 bullets while escaping after his apprehension and is now mopping up peacekeepers in District 2. Cressida and Pollux are getting footage, covering the wreckage of the war. Peeta is also in the burn unit. He did make it to the city circle after all. Her mother buries herself in work. Katniss says grief buries her. She's eventually released from the hospital and given a room to share with her mother in the president's mansion. Her mother sleeps mostly at the hospital now. They don't see much of each other. We never see Katniss and her mother reunite. It falls to Haymitch to check on her, make sure she's eating. She wanders unauthorized through the mansion, sleeping in closets, a similar routine to the one she kept in District 13. Ballrooms and baths, seeking strange little hiding places. She has a new mentally disoriented bracelet. Katniss believes President Snow and the Capitol killed her sister, dropped parachutes that represented survival, little hands reaching up toward the sky. And one day, Katniss wanders into a wing of the Capitol that she describes as cozy. She's never been here before, and she likes it. Muffled sounds, thick carpet, softly lit, muted colors. Then she smells the roses. She dives behind some curtains, terrified that mutts are about to overtake her. But then she realizes that no mutts are coming, and the smell is actually coming from a greenhouse. She follows the smell and arrives at a greenhouse manned by 2 rebel soldiers. They tell Soldier Everdeen that she is barred from entry. Katniss just stands there and looks at the guards, and they even consider calling Haymitch, but then
Commander Paler arrives and says that Katniss is entitled to anything behind that door, and so they let her in. Katniss walks into the greenhouse and has located the perfect rose. She finds a pair of pruning shears and is about to clip it off. That's a nice one. The colors are lovely, of course, but nothing says perfection like white. Snow is well-groomed and finely dressed as ever. He is shackled and handcuffed. Katniss wonders if Snow is being treated so well because Coin is trying to set a precedent about presidents that fall from power, that even the most despicable ones get special treatment. First things first, I'm very sorry about your sister. So wasteful, so unnecessary. Anyone could see the game was over. In fact, I was just about to issue an official surrender when they dropped those bombs. They released those parachutes? You obviously didn't think I made that order. Forget the fact that if I had a working hovercraft, I would have used it to escape. What purpose could it have served? We both know I'm not above killing children, but I'm not wasteful. I must concede it was a masterful stroke on Coin's part. The idea that I was bombing our own capital children instantly snapped whatever frail allegiance my people still had to me. Katniss doesn't want to believe him, but she's back in special weaponry, luring the victims into what appears to be a safe haven and what is actually a death trap. The first bomb killed the victims, the second the rescuers. Snow says I shouldn't have been so slow to grasp Coin's plan. I shouldn't be surprised since District 13 led the other districts into rebellion and then abandoned them as soon as the tide turned against it. But I was watching you, Mockingjay, and you were watching me. I'm afraid we've both been played. Katniss stumbles her way through the mansion in a panic. She thinks there's two options. One, the Capitol sent in the hovercraft, bombed the children, knowing that the rebels would go to their aid. There's evidence to support this, and it's not unlike them. The Capitol seal on the hovercraft, their lack of attempt to shoot down that craft, and their history of using children as sacrificial pawns. But two, there's Snow's account. Capitol hovercraft, manned by rebels, dropped those bombs to bring about a speedy end to the war. Katniss can't understand why they do that. Children are precious in 13. Well, she says, except me, when she'd outlived her usefulness, but she says I haven't been considered a child in this war in a long time. It's the double exploding bombs that are nagging her. That Snow made no escape attempt, even though she understands him to be the consummate survivor. She's thinking of Prim, not yet 14, not old enough to be even granted the title of soldier, but somehow on the front lines, as a medic, at the end of the war? She starts spinning out and knows there's only one person she can talk to. She finds Haymitch, drunk. She has to dump a pitcher of water on him to get him to wake up. She says, hey, I need your help. And he says, look at that! Mockingjay found her voice. What's up, sweetheart? More boy trouble. This hurts her enormously, and the hurt must register on her face because all of a sudden Haymitch starts backpedaling. Okay, not funny. Days later, after still not speaking to anyone, after the end of the war and the death of her sister and the loss of everyone that she's ever loved, Katniss is woken by her prep team staring over her. Surprise! Her prep team is here to remake her to Beauty Base 0, preparing her for the big event, which is the execution of the president. In her bedroom, polished from her metallic gold wig to her patent leather high heels, is Effie Trinket. She's remarkably unchanged except for a vacant look in her eye. Gale brings Katniss a bow and one arrow. He says it's meant to be symbolic, the last shot in the war. What if I miss? You won't miss. Was it your bomb? I don't know. Neither does BT. Does it matter? You'll always be thinking it. Her silence is her answer. She'll never be able to separate the moment she watched her sister burst into flames from Gale Hawthorne and his double snare trap. That was the only thing I had going for me anyway. Protecting your family? Shoot straight, okay? Katniss says she wants to forgive him. She wants to remember the circumstances under which this bomb was made. Find a way to prove that it wasn't the rebels. But she can't. So she'll just have to deal with the pain instead. Exit Gale. Katniss is directed to a room, and in that room, seated around the table, are all remaining victors. Peeta, Haymitch, Joanna, Anabaria, Annie, and BT. At this meeting, Coin advises the remaining victors that they are all protected under the Mockingjay Act. They're also informed that many civilians from the districts are calling for retribution for their suffering and exploitation. They've proposed a final symbolic Hunger Games, reaped from the children of the capital's powerful, wealthy elite. Peeta asks if she's joking. She says no, you'll each get an individual vote, but you should know that if the games do go ahead, it will be known that we've done so with your approval. Coin says it was her idea. Peeta votes no. Joanna votes yes, notes that Snow has a granddaughter. Anabaria votes yes, give them a taste of their own medicine. Peeta is frantic. He's like, this is why we rebelled! And that's cool language because he's grouping himself in with the rebels, even though he wasn't there most of the time. Annie votes no and says that Finnick would vote no too if he were here, and Joanna says, well, he's not because Snow killed him. BT votes no, says it would set a bad precedent. Katniss says she thinks all of her options through. She thinks of all those that she loved that are now dead. She thinks nothing has changed and nothing will change. She says, I vote yes. For Prim. It's down to Haymitch. Peter hammers him with facts about the atrocity he would become party to. Katniss says, in this moment, she can feel how exactly alike they really are. I'm with the Mockingjay. In a city circle, a crowd has gathered for the execution of this nation's former president. Katniss says Snow is marched out through a door, his hands tied behind his back. She says it's not really necessary for him to be tied up. There's nowhere for him to go. Where would he run to? He is now as trapped as she once was in this same circle. She loads her bow and meets Snow's eye. She expected to see anger, remorse, fear, but instead she sees amusement. I thought we'd agreed not to lie to each other. He's right. We did. She shifts the bow upward and releases it. She shot President Coin in the heart. In this final move, the ultimate defiance, proof that she is no one's pawn in whatever game, preventing another totalitarian-like regime, ruled by a power-hungry tyrant, willing to sacrifice the lives of children to maintain that power, to get what they want. Snow is choking on his own blood and laughing maniacally. Katniss moves to take her nightlock pill and ultimately end her life, but she ends up biting flesh instead of into the fabric on her shoulder. Peeta has intuited her move and has prevented her from committing suicide. Peeta blocks her and the pill falls to the ground. She says, "Let me go." I can't. Katniss is taken into rebel captivity. She thrashes and she screams and she fights and she knows that Gale is somewhere in the crowd and then that it's his job as her hunting partner to take her out in that moment, but he won't. But now he is letting her down in the same way she let him down. Katniss is kept in a room very similar to the room that she spent her time awaiting her Hunger Games. She's waiting to die. She attempts various hunger strikes, but eventually she starts to sing. In the shower and through her sleep, hours and hours of ballads and love songs and mountain airs. She says her voice warms up into something splendid. She becomes clear enough to wonder what the holdup is. She believes she's about to be executed for assassinating the sitting president. Katniss says she no longer feels any unity with these monsters called human beings. Any species that settles its differences by sacrificing the lives of children is a wrong one. Because the truth is, it benefits no one to live in a world where these things happen. After 2 days of lying on her mattress, her door finally opens. "Come on. Your trial's over. It's Haymitch. We're going home." He takes her toward a hovercraft, where she also greets Plutarch. "You must have a million questions!" Jury's still out on how Snow died. Might have been crushed by the crowd, maybe drowned in his own blood. Either are fitting. An emergency election was thrown together, and Commander Paler was elected as the interim president. Plutarch has been appointed Secretary of Communication, meaning that he's in charge of what plays on the airways, and the first big televised event was Katniss's trial, where he was a star witness in her defense, of course, and also her psychiatrist that presented her as a shell-shocked lunatic that couldn't be held accountable for her actions. That she now has to begin this performance to convince the people of the capital and the people of Panem that what she did with the berries was not rebellion or traitorous, but an act of lunacy. Katniss is being released back to District 12 contingent on her continuing to see a therapist over the phone. Plutarch says we're in that sweet period where everyone agrees our recent horrors are never to be repeated, but human beings are stupid and reckless creatures with a gift for self-destruction. Maybe not, though. Maybe we're witnessing human evolution. Maybe this is the last time. Haymitch is also returning to 12 to look after Katniss. Her mother won't be returning to 12 at all. She can't face it. Greasy Say has been hired maybe by the government to come in every day and cook and clean for Katniss. Katniss spends lots of time only moving between the kitchen and the bathroom. She's in the same clothes she left the Capitol in. One day, she wakes to the sound of shoveling. She runs down the hall to find Peeta planting primroses outside of her front door. This gives her the strength to run up to her bedroom and to get the overly perfumed, genetically modified rose that Snow has left there. It's been holding her hostage. She regards it as an evil thing that she needs to get out. Gale got some fancy job in District 2 and she sees him on TV occasionally. Katniss starts to go hunting again. She passes by the mayor's house on her way. They found the bodies of the entire family that used to live inside. She happens across Buttercup by the seam. They scream at each other over their mutual loss of Prim. She says Buttercup must understand eventually that Prim is not coming back because he warms up to Katniss. He lets Katniss clean his wounds. He must have walked all the way from District 13. Katniss and Peeta make a memory book. Annie sends news that her son has been born healthy and happy, but without a father. She hunts, Peeta bakes, Haymitch drinks, and raises geese. A few hundred others return to District 12. Although no one seeds it, the meadow turns green again. Katniss and Peeta grow together again. They still have flashbacks and intense nightmares, but their arms are there to comfort one another, and eventually, their lips. You love me. Real or not real? Real.
There are a boy and a girl in a meadow. The girl has long, curly brown hair and blue eyes. The boy, blonde locks with gray eyes. Peeta and Katniss have had children, trying to figure out every day how to feel safe in the land that they occupy now. Haymitch says he had no intention of adding to their silly little memory book. What's the point of dragging up old history? But when they got to the page on Burdock, he had many things to add, and then he needed to add stuff about Maisley, too, obviously, and the rest just followed suit. After he told them about Lenore Dove, it was Katniss that showed up with a basket of goose eggs. Not to eat, to hatch. He says when the gooselings hatched, His was the first face they saw, so they follow him everywhere. He's their mom. Sometimes they wander down to the meadow, effectively returning the goose to the common. Haymitch says he still drinks a lot and he's probably on his way out. Katniss says she will spend her life staving off nightmares, trying to explain her fear to her children. She says she spends every day counting all the good things she's ever seen anyone do. She says it's repetitive, long, but there are worse games to play. Haymitch says he talks to Lenore Dove in his head. She says, I love you like all fire. He says, I love you like all fire too. The sun rises every morning now, and never on the reaping. We are not in the epilogue of our sufferings. In fact, there's probably a lot more suffering to come. But what we can remember is that it's our job to carry on, to strive forward, and to hope for a better future. The only thing that made Haymitch and Katniss successful is that they were capable of envisioning a future that was not here yet, capable of envisioning a future that consisted of less suffering, capable of envisioning a future that didn't exist under the oppression of the capital. And they were right. And we can be too. This isn't our battle, we didn't build it, but it is our job to defeat it. It is our job to fight for the life that we want. It is our job to make sure that the generation that comes after us can live a life as prosperous, at least as ours. It is our job, it is our responsibility, and even though the generations before us have been reckless with their time, it's our turn to decide who we're going to be. We won't let the sun rise on the reaping, will we?